Chapter 507 Number 1. After another 2 days of slaughter and butchery, which was just 2 normal days by the Carnage Coliseum reckoning, Lu Ye's name on the Carnage roster had plunged beyond the 80th mark. One could almost say that it was just a matter of time before his name fell further and out of the list entirely. But killing the spell cultivator had seen his name regain a sudden spurt of life, propelling up to somewhere in the 50s. That was an unbelievable increment of 180 Carnage points. Many had noticed the new development on the Carnage roster, including Wei Quebec. He had been combing the Coliseum for prizes while hunting for any signs of Lu Yi. While his search had yielded a trove of treasures enough to make him happy, he was not amused at the lack of information on Lu Yi. Without any hints at all, there was little he could do in a vast space more than tens of thousands of miles in length and breadth. Knowing that Lu Yi was just a Cloud River Realm Third Order, it wasn't hard for him to do the math to make out that Lu Yi must have just slain a Sixth Order to gain that many Carnage points. For a Cloud River Realm Third Order to kill a Sixth Order, just thinking about it could make him shiver. That would explain why every sect and order in the Thousand Demon Ridge Alliance had been so fearful of this person. Let him grow and one day he might really become a figure that would forever torment the whole alliance at large. If today he could kill an enemy 3 ranks beyond his, he might one day be able to kill a real Lake Realm or even Divine Ocean Realm cultivators. Meanwhile, Zhang Liuzi and his brother too have noticed Lu Ye's name once again making headway on the Carnage roster. Deep inside, they were thankful Lu Shu had summoned them, drawing them away from their hunt on Lu Yi, or else, there was no telling if cornered, Lu Yi might be the one who turned the tables on them instead, and the hunters might become the hunted. At the same time, aside from fear and apprehension, the brothers had admiration and awe towards how Lu Yi had fared in this Coliseum. A Cloud River Realm Third Order who was barely hiding, and instead of keeping a low profile, he had been roaming around freely, swashbuckling with complete impunity for a position on the Carnage roster? Is he really not afraid of any reprisal from the Thousand Demon Ridge? If only Lu Yi knew what they were thinking about, he would be in such an uproarious protest. What others didn't know was the time and trouble that he had gone through to build all 12 teleportation wards. What the others did not know was that he had been strenuously trying to keep his head low, and just wanted to stay alive. What ruckus he had caused was not of his own volition. It was trouble that never stopped darkening his doorway. And for that, he really was feeling exasperated. At the moment, Lu Yi did not have the time or fancy to look at the Carnage roster. He hurried away from the cave and found another quiet spot where he immediately got to work constructing a new teleportation ward. That took a full hour before Lu Yi could finally breathe easier. He stuffed a spirit pill into his mouth and felt the sensation of his spiritual power replenishing. He had lost 3 out of the 12 teleportation wards he had prepared and had to make a new one, bringing the total up to 10 wards still remaining. He reflected on that last duel. It was dangerous, but he had managed to win because the enemy had been careless. Yi's attack from behind had distracted him enough for him to close distance, plus the terrain itself had given him an advantage. The cramped space had made it easy for Lu Yi and to pin down that opponent and launch their attacks from both fronts. She provided much of the diversion while he went for the kill. That was how they ended the fight quickly. It would not have been so easy if it were outside in the open. He could kill Fifth Orders with relative ease, and killing Sixth Orders would be immensely tricky. But if Lu Yi were to encounter any Seventh Orders, then the only thing to do would be to run, flee as quickly and as far as possible. The first order of business remained the same as before, to get stronger as quickly as possible before he walked right into another enemy far too strong for him to handle, despite how wide plethoras of tricks he might have hidden up his sleeve. His fox motif face mask had been shattered, which was expected, knowing how the masks were just ordinary face masks. It was damaged when a large rock hit Lu Yi in the face during the fight in the cave, causing him several cuts. Lu Yi removed the damaged mask and sat down quietly. The 24-hour limit of the gold amulet would be up at any time. Lu Yi did not know if there would be a 4th eruption, but if there was, then this new teleportation ward would have to be forfeited as well. Time passed by quickly. Lu Yi was cradling the gold amulet in his arms when a sudden emanation of light burst from it. He dismally watched it with a sense of resignation. The gold amulet surged, firing a powerful beam of light that soared straight into the heavens overhead, while emitting waves of spiritual power that every cultivator within 100 miles would sense. Swiftly, Lu Yi activated his teleportation ward, intending to shift himself to a different location. However, he was met with abrupt dismay upon discovering that the next teleportation ward he had selected was no longer accessible. The magical link was no more. That would mean that the teleportation ward had vanished, possibly due to an unwelcome intruder who had set off an explosion that laid waste to everything he had prepared. Despite his best efforts to conceal the ward in a remote and concealed locale, other cultivators must have been searching the place for hidden prizes until they came across the cave and decided to look inside. Fortunately, Lu Yi knew this would happen and he had prepared for this possibility. To that end, he had ensured that every teleportation ward could connect to at least 2 other wards nearby. In this case, he still has one more option to pick. With his new destination selected, Lu Yi reactivated the teleportation ward and he vanished, fading into the ether. Lu Yi immediately surveyed his surroundings the moment he appeared, ensuring that he was alone and no one was looking. Satisfied at last, he finally let out a sigh of relief. He extracted the gold amulet from his pocket. The long 24-hour duration had finally passed and the pale emerald glow that wrapped around the amulet was gone. At last, he could put the amulet away into his storage bag without any hindrance. A gold amulet! Lu Yi mused with a certain degree of disbelief and amazement. Losing a few teleportation wards in exchange for 1 gold amulet seemed like a fair bargain. But Lu Yi wasn't thrilled enough to want to experience this again. He would rather that the heavens select someone else to inflict its divine machinations on instead of him. His initial impression was that 12 teleportation wards would be sufficient for his use, but it seemed that he had underestimated the perils and challenges that abound in the Colosseum. On paper, he still had 8 teleportation wards remaining, but he could not be sure if every one of them was functioning as intended or how many of them had ceased to exist. He wouldn't know unless he were to examine all of them one by one. Nevertheless, activating teleportation wards emitted spiritual power signatures that others could detect. This was reason enough to discourage him from activating any one of them unless necessary. He could set up more wards, but to do that, he would need to produce more ward flags. He had already used up his supply with the last teleportation ward he had constructed. As much as he still had enough materials to make new ones, the process itself would also emit spiritual power signatures, which would risk exposing him, which could expose his hiding location. The opening duration of the Carnage Colosseum was usually unpredictable, lasting as long as a half-month or even a full one. But in just 2 days, almost 1/3 of his wards were gone. He would need to think of something if he wanted to maintain them until the end of the Colosseum. Lu Yi meditated and trained in the vastness of the cave with the handling security for him. With alarm wards set up as well, he was not at all worried about being ambushed. Unbeknownst to him, the entire Colosseum was thrown into havoc the moment he shoved the gold amulet into his storage bag. As a result of that action, his position on the Carnage roster soared from the 50th place to the 1st. His Carnage points from 550 points had risen as much as 1,000, making the total some 1,550. The mere notion of 1,000 Carnage points itself was a terrifying, much less ludicrously unbelievable one. The kill of a Cloud River Realm 5th Order was valued at a mere 40 Carnage points. That would mean one had to kill 25 5th Order to get that many points. While Cloud River Realm 8th and 9th Orders all around the Colosseum had been busy killing and maiming to no end, none of them had come close to reaching that many Carnage points yet. Even second place Xiaoliang's score was a far cry away from Lu Ye's. Most if not all of the rest of the names on the Carnage roster had only 300 to 500 points, and the disparity further highlighted how incredible Lu Ye's 1,550 Carnage points were. There was not one cultivator in the Colosseum who was not shocked by this, notwithstanding those who already had their fingers on Lu Ye's name. This time, virtually everyone was looking at the Carnage roster, focusing on his name with incredulity. The Colosseum was abuzz with discussion. Who is this person? I have never heard of him before. Many wondered. That a cultivator could be at the forefront of so many experienced Cloud River Realm cultivators on the Carnage roster must mean this person must be a powerful and strong warrior. But few had heard of the name Lu Yi. especially those who had spent so much time in the Cloud River battlefield that they had little to no recent knowledge about the Spirit Creek battlefield, or even anything from the real world of JoJo. But how could anyone increase his carnage points by 1,000 in just one go? Have the heavens made a mistake? A Cloud River First Order who killed a Ninth Order would still not receive so many carnage points. But there was little reason to doubt the heavens. The mysterious entity had a reputation for being fair and brutal at the same time. A mistake like this was never likely. Gaining carnage points doesn't only occur from killing, but also from possessing that special gold amulet. The cultivator who was holding the gold amulet yesterday was awarded 300 carnage points. Someone pointed out. Why is it 1,000 today then? Asked another, perplexed. It depends on the person's cultivation rank and how long they had been in possession of the amulet within the 24-hour period. The lower the person's cultivation rank and the longer they hold on to it, the more carnage points they will receive. It's the heavens who determine how much they will be awarded exactly. In this case, it's likely that this person has held the gold amulet for the whole duration of the 24-hour limit, and I dare say that their cultivation rank is no higher than the 5th order, if not lower. Wow, I have never heard of such a thing before. Thank you for enlightening us. To have such a low cultivation rank and yet manage to hold on to the amulet the whole time. This person must be incredibly powerful, exclaimed a third someone in awe. Maybe he or she's a ghost cultivator. Only ghost cultivators who excel in stealth have such an advantage, speculated another. Nay, I think I know who he is. Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect of Bingzhou province. Back then in the Spirit Creek battlefield, he caused enough upheavals to rile up everyone. And as far as I know, he is not a ghost cultivator but a combat cultivator, and his rank is definitely no more than the 5th order, a First Order most probably. He's been in the Cloud River battlefield for barely 2 months. What? A First Order? Gasped one of them in shock. Any other First Order would have found it an impossible task to survive in the Carnage Coliseum, let alone hold on to the gold amulet for 24 hours. Even for higher-ranked cultivators, the feat itself seemed unimaginable enough to accomplish. That was how many, who at first did not know how Louis could earn so many carnage points in one go, came to understand how this was just a reward from the heavens for a job well done. A job that not even they 7th or 8th orders could boast of completing. Chapter 508. An incredible figure. A ray of light landed just outside the Carnage Coliseum. It was Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They had rushed all the way here non-stop for 2 days. Despite the need for haste, they did not recklessly rush inside. They might not have participated in the Carnage Coliseum, but they had heard enough about the event to know that cultivators would be hiding in ambush around the entrance, waiting to waylay any unsuspecting fresh entrants to earn carnage points. They looked for a secluded spot and sat down to meditate and recuperate. Almost 6 hours later they got up. They looked at each other, a tacit sign that both of them were ready. Rays of light sparkled around them, more than 50 of them, and circled around them, each of them the conjuration of Li Baxian that resembled a swarming horde of flying swords. Ready? Li Baxian asked. Feng Yuechan nodded. Let's go then. The multitudinous shafts of light coalesced as one, joining together to form the likeness of a dragon that coiled around Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, whisking them up into the air before slamming into the scarlet-red wall of light that was the entrance into the Colosseum. The air reverberated with the steely hum of the sword dragon that took into the air in its ferocious splendor. On the other side of the deep red sheet of light, scores of cultivators were waiting for their new prey when a sword dragon of white came blasting through the entrance of the Colosseum. The mere white-hot luminescence of the many sword-shaped shafts looked menacing enough to make any prowling enemy cultivator think twice about attacking. The dragon flew past the unseen gauntlets of cultivators that remained hidden and slithered through the air furiously, speeding away until it was out of sight. No one attacked it. Of the many cultivators that had been camping at the peripherals of the Colosseum's entrance, no one had done anything at all. No one could doubt that that must be a sword cultivator making his entrance into the Carnage Coliseum. The sheer amount of shafts of light prolifically fused into the semblance of a raging dragon was enough to dissuade any would-be assailants from doing anything stupid. What if it was someone incredible? The sword dragon itself was clearly a testament to the newcomer's might and prowess. then attacking the newcomer would be nothing but a hasty and foolhardy mistake. A few champions quickly noticed that their caution was excessive. But by the time they realized that the sword cultivator that came in wasn't anyone overtly powerful, it was too late. The sword dragon had long streaked beyond their ability to catch up. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan maintained their altitude for moments longer, before they finally landed somewhere in the wilderness. Li Baxian dispelled the army of swarming lights and they dropped to the ground one after another. If that really is Lu Yi at the top of the roster, that would mean that he must be in hardly any danger at all. He's having fun. Nevertheless, he could not tell if that really was Lu Yi yet, not until he asked Lu Yi himself. Lu Yi, that Lu Yi guy at the first place of the Carnage roster, is that you? Lu Yi was sitting right at the center of another one of his many teleportation wards when he received word from his senior brother. He flatly denied, no, that's not even possible. His highest was somewhere between the 10th and the 20th spots. There might have been changes after he had killed that 6th order. By now, he expected that his name must have long dropped out of the roster again. To top it off, Lu Yi had only 3 kills under his belt, amounting to almost 550 Carnage points, which would bring him no closer to the top spot of the Carnage roster. Then it must just be a coincidence. There's a guy here with the same name as you and he's occupying the first place of the roster with 1,550 Carnage points, said Li Baxian while he thought. This fellow must be a 9th order. With this many Carnage points, there's no way he's a low-tier cultivator. Li Baxian knew exactly who the second place Xiao Yang was. Formerly one of the best cultivators of the Spirit Creek battlefield, the Raving Bladesman had once fought against Li Baxian before, and the latter knew for a fact that Xiao Yang was a powerful figure who was now beyond any doubt a 9th order. But this mysterious figure who shared the same name as Lu Yi was now the leading participant in the Carnage Coliseum, and that would mean he must be stronger and more dangerous than Xiao Yang. What an incredible figure! Far away, deep inside his cave, Lu Yi began to feel something had gone amiss. But he did not dwell too much into it. As far as he was concerned, he has only 550 Carnage points, not the amount that could possibly put him in the first place. What perturbed him more was the fact that Li Baxian had endangered himself by entering the Colosseum for his sake. It was a move that Lu Yi felt conflicted about. He was touched and worried at the same time. To say nothing of the other fact, that was how Li Baxian had deliberately kept this a secret from him. Only after coming in, did he finally reveal that he had come all the way here just to look for Lu Yi. Lu Yi extracted his 10-point map and ascertained his position, which he informed Li Baxian about. We're coming for you, brother. Wait for us. After sending his last message, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan set off for Lu Ye's position. It wasn't too far and flying using telekinesis should have just taken 2 or 4 hours. But they could not risk being seen, therefore they had to keep to the ground and to slower speeds. Quickly they pressed on. In the meantime, Lu Yi waited inside the cave quietly. All in all, Li Baxian coming to join him was nevertheless good news to him. Fighting with him around would mean higher survivability. At any rate, there were still the teleportation wards to rely on in the case of encountering any superior enemies. He did not neglect to notice that Li Baxian said we. That meant he had to be with someone else, which was most probably Feng Yuechan. How powerful they were right now, Lu Yi did not know. By his reckoning, they had entered the Cloud River battlefield a few months before he did, so they should be almost at the same level. Moreover, they had spent more than a decade in the Spirit Creek battlefield. The amount of experience and mastery of the skills they had amassed through so many years have made it easy for them to slay even cultivators beyond their current ranks. Especially since no one with just as much talent and gifts as them had stayed so long in the Spirit Creek realm. Yet all the time spent honing their experience and skills barely did any justice to the extraordinary natural gifts they had. Even those of average aptitude would find it unprofitable to linger in the Spirit Creek realm for more than a decade. In fact, such a prolonged stay could have been better spent advancing straight through the Cloud River realm and into the orders of the True Lake realm. Having pondered this, Lu Yi opted not to remain in the cave any longer. Instead, he found refuge somewhere else and activated glyph concealment to shroud himself from sight. Li Baxian was already on his way here, and it would be a massive quandary if he were to get himself trapped inside the cave when someone else were to arrive first. He could use his teleportation ward to escape, but that would mean he and Li Baxian would be separated. He could choose to stay and fight, but that would mean a certain amount of risk. Hence, he decided to just wait outside for better tactical mobility and flexibility. He had just settled in comfortably in his hiding spot when he remembered what Li Baxian was asking him about earlier. That made him look up at the Carnage roster hanging overhead. Li Baxian was right. There really was a Lui in the lead. So there really is someone with the same name as mine, eh? That's amusing. His gaze began to travel downward. But the longer he looked, the more the sense of dread and disquiet intensified. Then he reached the bottom of the Carnage roster, where the last name had 530 Carnage points. By his calculation, he expected to have 550 Carnage points at least. That should place him somewhere in the 90th odd. Yet he could check for another 100 times and still, his name was nowhere else in sight other than at the top. There was only one Lui in the Carnage roster, and it was at the top. Wait, does that mean that I've been calculating it wrong? My Carnage points are not 550? That's impossible. Chapter 509 Rendezvous. Lui was right. Li Baxian came with Feng Yuechan and they were fighting side by side with each other. He with his telekinesis and she with her spiritual power pulsing in huge undulations as she fired one spell after another at their assailants. But there were not 3, not 4, but 5 assailants in all. Had been more like. One of them was sprawled on the ground with a spreading pool of red beneath him. There was no telling if he was already dead, but he was clearly put to the ground by Li Baxian no less. Another one was some distance away. His entire person radiated rich spiritual energy as he waved a flag. A ward flag, back and forth again and again. Without any doubt he had to be a ward cultivator, and the signature of his spiritual energy indicated that he was a 5th order. So were the rest of the remaining 3 assailants still engaging Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They were also 4th and 5th orders. Yet despite their superior advantage in numbers, none of them looked like they were enjoying this one bit. If anything, their eyes were fraught with shock and trepidation, for Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan must be far more powerful than they expected. It was an ambush that should have worked with the elements of superior numbers and surprise. Yet they were not able to capitalize on their advantage and defeat this duo. Instead, one of them was killed. Fortunately for them, the ward cultivator had managed to activate the ward that he had cast beforehand in time, and that somehow evened the odds considerably. Nevertheless, that did not make the fight any easier. The deadly shafts of light with speeds, intensity, and power that could snuff out their lives if they were not careful, plus the powerful spells that never stopped screaming at them, were all enough to make this easily one of the hardest skirmishes they had ever fought in. Where the hell did these 2 monstrosities pop out from? Instead of waylaying what they anticipated as easy targets, these enemy cultivators knew very well that they had just poked the hornet's nest. But it did not take long for the enemy 5th orders to realize that prolonging this fight was not going to end in their favor. Even if they could still hold their ground, the commotion of the fight could attract unwanted attention. All would still be well if allied 1,000 demon-rich cultivators were to come this way. Any form of help would be sorely welcomed. But if it was someone from the Grand Sky Coalition, then these marauders would have to rue their poor luck. It was a 50-50 wager that none of them were willing to risk. Hold up, one of them cried at last. This is just a misunderstanding. Now everybody stop and take one step back before we do anything else we might regret. As much as they wished to withdraw, this could only be done if both parties had arrived at an understanding with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan ceasing and desisting just like them. There was little pity for the one who was killed. As an outsider who was only roped in to make up the numbers, the others were more than willing to chalk his demise up to bad luck than to further endanger themselves. The cry did its job. Li Baxian quietly furrowed his brow and dialed back his power. Being trapped in the magical ward might have limited both his and Feng Yuechan's power to 8/10 of their usual level, but the presence of a ward cultivator in the midst of the enemy did not mean that he lacked both the confidence and ability to slay all these enemies. In fact, the odds of success were even higher with Feng Yuechan's help. The magical ward wasn't anything too powerful or complex for them to overcome. For more than 10 years he and Feng Yuechan had stayed in the Spirit Creek battlefield. They might have squandered precious time, but the time had also allowed them to develop valuable experience, skill, and maturity. The enemies were just a ragtag crew of a few mediocre 4th and 5th orders that never stood any chance in the first place. Then again, Li Baxian was hardly a fool who failed to recognize the risks of waging open combat in broad daylight within Colosseum grounds where untold perils awaited everywhere and any time. His primary objective remained to regroup with Lu Yi. Relieved at the chance for a parley, Li Baxian grunted his agreement. Very well. Li Baxian toned down his attacks further. The enemy 5th Order who sued for peace was about to heave a long breath of relief when a shrill cry of pain slashed across the newly minted truce. His face fell with dismay. That cry was the voice of the ward cultivator. His peripheral vision caught sight of a figure he had not seen before. Creeping up on the ward cultivator from behind, the stranger had impaled his saber through the chest of the ward cultivator, the cool glint of the weapon only veiled by the macabre sheen of blood on its surface. Blasted! When Lu Yi first got here, he immediately saw how Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan were pinned down. With his glyph insight, he quickly discovered that they were trapped in a magical ward that was being maintained by an enemy cultivator. That was what prompted him to stealthily sneak close and deliver his one-hit kill. His poor quarry had had his hands full in dealing with both Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan. Their deadliness and prowess had kept him so tense, anxious, and awed that he did not even see Lu Yi creeping closer. By the time he noticed Lu Yi lunging, it was already too late. Inviolable stabbed through his ribs, eliciting a huge fountain of blood out of the gash at his front when Lu Yi yanked it free before it came back in an arc that lopped off the head like a cook chopping off the greens on top of a carrot. At the same time, the swarming shafts of light that had been diminishing and their movements slackened suddenly flared up as if they were given a new lease of life. As Lu Yi decapitated his quarry, the shafts of light all dove at the 5th Order who called for a truce just now, raining a furious onslaught upon him that he could barely hold his ground as he stumbled backward due to the sheer strength of every shaft that attacked him. But just when he thought he had managed to regain a steady foothold, death came from behind. It was Lu Yi stepping within the bounds of the magical ward, charging straight at them. Inviolable swung in a deadly curve even before he got near. A scythe of glowing luminescence roared through the air and smashed through the enemy 5th Order's protective aura and blasted a gaping hole on his back that never stopped bleeding in profuse spates. All he managed to do was let loose one agonizing shriek that lasted not 1 second at all before he went dead silent. Lu Yi did not stop. He bolted past the dying enemy still wobbling and churning out blood, to race for his next target, his saber now dripping a slick trail of crimson as he moved. Only after he was far away did the 5th Order drop dead to the ground. But Lu Yi wasn't anywhere near his next target, when the latter was hit by a lightning elemental spell. Serpentine tendrils of electricity snaked all over him, paralyzing him like a giant web of lightning as he slowly cooked to death before a second spell blasted a hole straight through his chest, killing him instantly. On the other hand, Li Baxian swiftly made short work of the last 4th Order enemy with his flying sword-shaped shafts of light. In barely 10 seconds the battle was over, all thanks to Lu Yi. In the wake of that action-packed 10 seconds, Li Baxian and his junior brother shared a quick look at each other. The former's gaze filled with surprise and marvel. Lu Yi gave a wave and yelped, "Come on! This way!" He wheeled around and scampered off with Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan peeling closely behind. Yi quickly swooped up what loot she could collect before she went back underground and followed after them. As he ran, Lu Yi took the chance to look up into the sky. His vision homed in on the first name on the Carnage roster, and the dread and apprehension that followed made the corners of his eyes throb, both involuntarily and uncontrollably. Once they got inside the cave, Lu Yi instructed Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan on how to avoid triggering the explosive wards before they finally reached the vastness and safety of the rock chambers deeper inside. They sat down and Li Baxian looked around. His face went alight with amazement. What is this? A magical ward. He could tell that a magical ward had been constructed here, although his lack of knowledge in the arcane mastery of ward building prevented him from identifying it. But Lu Yi had brought them here. That would mean that this magical ward must mean something. A teleportation ward. What? A teleportation ward? Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan could not believe it. They had heard about how talented Lu Yi was in the mastery of ward casting, but neither of them knew that he was skilled enough to construct a teleportation ward. Neither of them had imagined this was possible, especially since Lu Yi was only just a Cloud River realm cultivator. How far can you go with this? Li Baxian had to ask. The further the ward could reach, the greater its value would be. Teleportation wards that could go only as far as a dozen miles were useless, to say the least. Any other Cloud River realm enemies worth their salt could easily close that amount of distance in no time. About 200 miles. Li Baxian inhaled a long deep breath. Even Feng Yuechan looked utterly bewildered. They might be of similar ranks of cultivation, but they were nevertheless more experienced and seasoned than Lu Yi, and that was why they understood the significance behind Lu Ye's ability to construct a teleportation ward that could scale distances as far as 200 miles. For what it was worth, Lu Ye's skill and gifts in ward casting was far greater than they expected. And beyond any doubt, he had to have constructed several such wards or he would not have chosen to hide inside this cave. With these wards, Lu Yi would be able to maintain his safety even though he was weaker than most of the contestants of this Carnage Coliseum, assuming he hadn't been everywhere causing a ruckus and inviting unwanted attention. Still, Li Baxian could barely prevent shedding beads of anxious perspiration down the side of his face. He had been so worried about Lu Ye's safety, thinking that his young junior brother was trapped somewhere, besieged by mortal threats. It was this belief that had driven them both to rush here at once. Of all the difficulties they anticipated Lu Yi to be in, this scenario was definitely not what they envisioned. But this was unequivocally good news. Lu Yi was safe, and with these teleportation wards, he could easily escape if he encountered an enemy that was too powerful to handle. That reminded Li Baxian of something else. Their rank of cultivation. Wait a second, you're a third order now, Lu Yi. It had not been 2 months yet since Lu Yi had made his ascension into the Cloud River realm. That was why Li Baxian had been under the impression that Lu Yi was not in the second order yet until he noticed otherwise. I was lucky. I found a pocket dimension not long ago, and that allowed me to earn enough to exchange for several amulets. Yi finally arrived as they were talking. She demurely bowed to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. My respects to you, brother Baxian and sister Yuechan. You've grown prettier since I last saw you, sister. Li Baxian nodded approvingly. Which was true. Since Yi and Amber's ascension into the Cloud River realm, the former had begun to grow more beautiful as a woman. The praise made Yi so happy that her eyes turned into crescents. Feng Yuechan took her aside to talk, but not before he handed the loot she fetched from the scene of the battle earlier to Lu Yi. Lu Yi took the loot from her and laid it down. Then he began undoing the magical seals of every storage bag, while he and Li Baxian continued their chat. Lu Yi had taken note of Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's cultivation rank during the earlier fight. Both of them were 1 rank higher than he was, 4th orders. They had been here in the Cloud River battlefield longer than he was. His fortune had been good and so had theirs. To that end, everyone had managed to progress quickly enough. The conversation took a turn and Li Baxian began asking about the recent events in the Crimson Blood sect. Li Baxian sighed when he finally heard that the sect was improving and its future was bright and promising. This is where I say I'm sorry, brother. The sect's present prosperity was Lu Ye's single-handed hard work and toil. Back when he first arrived, there was no one else but him and Shui Yuan aside from their mentor Tang Yifeng. But today, the Crimson Blood sect could boast a membership of 700 to 800 man strong, if not 1,000, stationed at its outpost in the Spirit Creek battlefield. No other sect or order could possibly claim to wield similar strength and influence, especially in the outer ring regions of the battlefield. To say nothing of the blessings on the outpost's divine opportunity column, that had ensured a level of spiritual chi ambience that few other outposts could emulate. Even the contribution points owned by the outposts were enough to purchase more blessings. Furthermore, the riches that the 1,000 demon rich sects and orders had surrendered as tributes were enough for the outpost to go on operating for at least another couple or more decades. Such were the contributions that Lu Yi alone had made to the sect. Chapter 510 Blessed with Luck. Lu Yi finished unlocking the magical seals of the storage bags while they chatted. The number of enemies was only 5. But the amount of storage bags that Yi had recovered was a good 20-odd of them. The 5 did not need so many storage bags. Most cultivators had no more than 3 storage bags for convenience and classification of their items and equipment. Yet they had more than 20 bags in all, and Lu Yi could only think of one reason. These must be the bags they had looted off other poor victims they had waylaid, and they had now become Lu Ye's prize. Lu Ye picked out 10 of the storage bags and slid the rest to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, which Li Baxian did not decline. As brothers in arms, there was no need to be coy. He took the storage bags and emptied them all. Lu Ye did the same. There wasn't anything remarkably precious to be expected, just some usual supplies that could be useful. There were items such as spirit artifacts and supplies that he could sell off for contribution points, but some he might take back to the main stronghold of his sect. Most Cloud River realm cultivators used middle-grade spirit artifacts, and hence they could fetch very good prices. He went on searching through the pile of loot until he found a tiny little box glowing with an iridescent luminescence. He recognized what it was. A box containing an amulet. Without thinking further, Lu Ye flipped the lid open and a bluish glow came pouring out. God, you really have great luck, brother, Li Baxian moaned with amazement. Both he and Feng Yuechan had their own share of good luck since entering the Cloud River battlefield. In fact, he still had 3 boxes containing amulets himself, although he had never once gotten anything beyond a green amulet thus far. He had spoken to others at length about the unpredictability of such boxes, which were more commonly known as amulet chests. The chest was enchanted by the powers of the heavens, the de facto entity shrouded with an enigma that governed all things, to grant its opener an amulet of varying quality, depending on their luck. It could be a gold, although the possibility would be absurdly slim. Even a purple amulet would be rare enough. Most cultivators expected to get a white or a green. Some with better luck might see a blue. That was why Li Baxian had decided to gather as many amulet caskets as possible and open them all together. Maybe that way, he could obtain a good amulet. If he could not rely on his luck to provide him with a good amulet, then perhaps a bigger number of tries could tip the scales. But right here, right now, Lu Ye had stumbled on a blue amulet right off the bat. I think my luck has been good since receiving the gift of providence when I was making my ascension to the Cloud River realm. That last time when I discovered that pocket dimension I told you about. I found a magic that could manipulate the traits of a spirit beast. A stranger told me that selling it to the Vault of Providence would earn me the heaven's blessings, meaning that my luck would increase, and that was what I did. Wait, you got the gift of providence? Li Baxian yelped. That was the first time he heard about this. With him and Feng Yuechan already inside the Cloud River battlefield, Li Baxian was deprived of any fresh news from the real world of Zhou and everywhere else outside the battlefield. Yeah, that explains it. Teacher had told me a long time ago that senior brother Feng, who was the last person to receive the gift of providence, had enjoyed a tremendous run of good luck after that. Anything he did, as if he had the help of the heavens themselves, would just work. That was how he became so feared and respected that at one point, he wielded as much power and authority as the chief of the Grand Sky Coalition. So it was not just some fairy tale then. Then, he had an idea. He extracted all 3 amulet caskets from inside his storage bag and handed them to Lu Ye. Try opening these for me, Lu Ye. Knowing that Lu Ye has been blessed with tremendous luck, letting him open the amulet caskets might be a good idea. There was a possibility of getting a gold amulet. That reminded Lu Ye about Xia Qianqian. She too had asked him to open her amulet casket just a few days ago. Instead of being able to make use of his good fortune, all she got was just a white amulet. 3 pairs of eyes stared intently. Lu Ye placed a hand on the first casket and flipped open the lid. A wash of white-hot phosphorescent came gushing out. Lu Ye's brow cocked with interest. Peculiar. Up until today, he had opened a total of 4 amulet caskets. The first one was his, and it yielded a purple amulet. The next one was Xia Qianqian's, which spouted a white one. The third one, which was the one just now, gave him a blue amulet. Now this, another white. If the first time's a coincidence, what about this time? It's fine. Fortune can turn on a dime, brother. Let's try the next one, said Li Baxian. Lu Ye hesitated. Can you give these 2 caskets to me, brother? He asked gingerly. No problem. They're yours. If I had known about this, I would have tried to save more amulet caskets for you. Lu Ye did not wait. He was already opening the lid of the next casket. An emerald green glow came pouring out. A green amulet. Mediocre but still acceptable. Then the last casket. A breathtakingly rich violet incandescence blazed from within as soon as the lid cracked open, casting a purplish sheen on everyone's amazed countenance. "Incredible!" exclaimed Li Baxian in disbelief. Even Feng Yuechan's eyes were the size of eggs. No one had expected that he would get a purple amulet, 27 times more valuable than a white, on his third try. Seeing really is believing, and witnessing Lu Ye's extraordinarily remarkable fortune up close and in the flesh, one could well comprehend what an incredible boon the gift of Providence was. Barely a month ago, Li Baxian was just telling Feng Yuechan how it could be easier to find a 4-leaf clover than expect amulet caskets to yield any amulets purple or beyond. A blue moon comes around about as often as such an improbable occurrence. Yet here, after almost 30 days, fate had elected to prove him wrong. Lu Yi slid the caskets containing both the green amulet and purple amulet back to Li Baxian. The latter peered at him incredulously. "I think it only works when I'm opening my own amulet caskets. If I'm opening it on behalf of someone else, my good luck wouldn't work." That was why he asked Li Baxian to give him both the amulet caskets in the first place, he explained further. It was only to verify his guess. It could not be just mere coincidence when every single casket that he opened for others only yielded white amulets while those that belonged to him provided better rewards. But this proved his hypothesis. Whatever good luck the heavens had bestowed him with, it would only work for his benefit and his alone. Anyone thinking of exploiting this extraordinary providence through him would be sorely disappointed. Li Baxian peered at the amulet caskets and shook his head. "No, brother. I cannot take them." Lu Yi was about to protest, but Li Baxian stopped him. Smiling, he said, "I understand, brother. But luck is something intangible that you can't see or feel. If your current string of good luck is really a result of you receiving the gift of providence, then you should be even more careful. The reach of the entity we know as the heavens is far and boundless. Any form of perfidious manipulation or deceitful trickery in the use of this extraordinary luck you now embody might be seen as a slight towards this omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient being. That could affect the favor you now have with the heavens, or worse, see you ruined." "What? Is that true?" Lu Yi yelped with trepidation. "It's prudent to practice caution," said Li Baxian pensively. When it came to the heavens, he would rather tread carefully than make flippant and sloppy mistakes. Not even the slightest one. Li Baxian would have readily pounced on the offer of a purple amulet if it were anyone else. The amulet would have ensured a huge increase in his power. But this was Lu Yi, his own brother-in-arms that he owed his loyalty to. He could not just sit and watch him commit what could be a disastrous mistake. "He's right," Lu Yi added Feng Yuechan. "We can't be too careful with issues of such gravity. In the future, be wary of anyone wanting to make use of your extraordinary fortune for their own gain. You could put yourself at great risk." Lu Yi nodded. "Very well. I'll keep the amulets, but you'll keep the rest of the loot." He pushed the pile of storage bags which was his portion of the bounty towards them. This time Li Baxian proffered no objection. Satisfied, he picked up the pouches piecemeal and appended each of them to empty their contents. Lu Yi examined the insides of his own storage bag. He had several amulets in total, 1 gold, 1 purple, 1 blue, 1 green, and a couple of whites, all of which should be enough for him to make it to the 4th order. He had progressed enough and it wouldn't be too long before he reached the next order, which would have to wait until the Carnage Coliseum ended. To consume amulets required time, a commodity that could be viewed as a luxury in the Coliseum. A white amulet needed barely a quarter of an hour, but a gold amulet would take at least a day and night to fully assimilate, and the process could not be interrupted. Any disturbance could cause terrible losses. Therefore the best solution would be to wait until the Coliseum had ended. Then Lu Yu could start searching for a hidden and secure location. In that case, brother, you could just purchase any number of amulet caskets. Try to get as many as possible in the price range of green amulets. With your luck, you might have quite a haul waiting to drop on your lap, Li Baxian suggested suddenly. Green amulet? That would just be around 600 to 700 contribution points in that case, quipped Feng Yuechan, chuckling. That's not a number of points that Cloud River Realm cultivators would hanker after. Therefore no. Amulet caskets gotta be higher than that. Remember, every single casket represents a cultivator's chance. however small it might be, to procure a gold amulet. If anyone's gonna sell caskets away for 600 to 700 contribution points, then they might as well just open the caskets themselves. Who knows? The heavens might somehow take a liking to them and drop them a gold one. Li Baxuan thought about what she said and felt she had a point. You're right. That was true. Even he himself, now that he thought of it, would be reluctant to part with an amulet casket for a measly 600 to 700 contribution points. Like Feng Yuechan said, every casket represented hope. An amulet casket might reveal a gold amulet, and if this did really happen right after he had sold his casket to someone else, he would suffer a stroke. To say nothing of the fact that amulets remained an important if not one of the few ways cultivators relied upon to progress. Most people immediately opened their caskets as soon as they found one, which would make amulet caskets a rare commodity to be offered up for sale. Hence, the idea of purchasing more amulet caskets was a dead end. While some cultivators could be tempted to part with their amulet caskets at the offer of a price that equaled blue amulets, there was no absolute certainty in whether transactions like this would be profitable or not. Nevertheless, that anyone would sell off their caskets in the first place remained a very, very big if. With the distribution of the loot, the amulet caskets were all opened, the looted storage bags emptied and their contents tucked away. Completed, Li Baxuan singled out one of the storage bags, filled with more spirit pills and stones before tossing it to Lu Yi. Without waiting for a reply, Li Baxuan pointed out, "It's filled with ward flags." Lu Yi disavowed any thought of protesting. He peered inside. There really were several dozens of ward flags inside, making this the storage bag that once belonged to the ward cultivator he slew. Lu Yi had a good many ward flags before, but recent use had pretty much exhausted his supply, and this could not have come at a better time. He did not decline the offer and put away the storage bag. "So what are your plans after this, brother?" Li Baxuan asked. "Well, at first I was thinking of laying low here until the Colosseum ended. If anything happened, I'd just escape using these teleportation wards." And now, Li Baxuan's brow cocked. He could hear that Lu Yi had something else in mind. Lu Yi sighed. Quietly he admitted, "Well, about that. There is something else that I've not yet told you about. I think the name now at the number 1 spot of the Carnage roster is mine." Chapter 511 I'm number 1. Inside the vastness of the underground cavern, Li Baxuan and Feng Yuechan were staring blankly at Lu Yi. Seconds ticked by in silence before the stillness broke with Li Baxuan uttering his question. "Wait. I thought you said that it was someone else." "That was what I thought at first. By my calculations before, I did not have that many Carnage points. The name in the first place has 1,000 points more than what I estimated I should have. It was after I killed those 2 fifth orders, I noticed that the Carnage points for the name in the first place rose by 240. They harked back at the fight just now. 5 assailants had waylaid Li Baxuan and Feng Yuechan when they were coming here. One of them had already been killed by Li Baxuan when Lu Yi arrived at the scene. Lu Yi first ambushed the 5th Order ward cultivator before he took down another 5th Order. That added 2 notches to his belt. As a 3rd Order, killing a pair of 5th Orders who were beyond his rank would earn him 120 Carnage points apiece. The name in the first place of the Carnage roster had 1,550 points when Lu Yi last checked. But after he had slain the 5th Orders, the tally had risen 240 points, making the total 1,790 points. With how he could no longer find his name amongst the 90-somethings, Lu Yi could only conclude that he really was number 1 on the Carnage roster. The amount of Carnage points rising definitely wasn't a coincidence. "But you said that the amount is 1,000 more than what you've calculated?" "How?" pointed out Li Baxuan. "Well, I can only think of one reason." Lu Yi extracted the gold amulet he stored inside his storage sphere. "It should be because of this," he said, referring to the amulet. "The heavens pick someone every day for this. Within the first 24 hours this amulet can't be used, it can't be kept inside another dimension, and only after the 24 hours duration will the amulet be truly yours. I was picked once." Li Baxuan pondered on other possible origins of the 1,000 Carnage points. Lu Yi was similarly incredulous himself, but he was convinced that his theory was right. It was a pity that the trove of information that he purchased from the Divine Trade Association did not include anything like this, or he would have been able to make sure. A 1,000 carnage points difference. The amount itself was too large for a mistake. Let me ask around, Feng Yuechan added suddenly, and she began communicating with other people. Li Baxian wasn't a very popular figure within the membership of the devoted ones, but Feng Yuechan was an altogether different case. Her pedigree, beautiful looks and grace, as well as her talents had made her a favorite to everyone in the order. For more than a decade she had watched scores of devoted ones leaving the Spirit Creek battlefield while she stayed back. By now, there were many who had reached 8th and 9th Order, and they had to know enough about the Carnage Coliseum. She got an answer quickly enough. Gold amulets bestowed by the heavens do indeed come with Carnage point rewards, and the points awarded commensurate with one's rank of cultivation and the duration of one's possession of the amulet. The lower your rank is and the longer the duration of your possession, the more Carnage points you'll get. A third order who had held on to the gold amulet for 24 hours. No one else across the real world of Zhou save Lu Yi could have accomplished such a deed. No other third order could have survived the 4 instances of onslaught that happened after each time the amulet's eruption of spiritual power broadcasted his position. No third order could have fended off the attacks by so many enemy cultivators, and still lived to see the next morning. Yet Lu Yi managed to survive, and it was the success of such an impossible mission that had seen him being awarded 1,000 Carnage points. That propelled him to the top of the Carnage roster while leaving the first runner-up and the former leader of the roster miles behind. With this being the second day of the Carnage Coliseum, there was one more gold amulet that was bestowed to an unknown cultivator. The gold amulet changed hands several times in the 24-hour duration until it fell into the hands of an 8th Order, who managed to hold on to it for the last 4 hours, winning both the amulet and 300 Carnage points. Naturally, Lu Yi knew nothing about this. He had been busy skittering across the length and breadth of the terrain, searching for places to plant his booby traps and teleportation wards. That was marvelous. Li Baxian rubbed his palms expectantly. For most third orders, being bestowed a gold amulet by the heavens in the Carnage Coliseum was synonymous with being given a death sentence. But to Lu Yi, it posed no more danger than a walk through a minefield. But with all the astute preparations Lu Yi had done, the teleportation wards and the many explosive wards to protect them, the risk had been reduced to nil. That made this 1,000 Carnage points practically a free gift from the heavens. Li Baxian began to comprehend the extent of Lu Ye's good fortune. Well, my initial plan was to hide here for the sake of my safety. I thought that I might only come out after the Colosseum was over. But now, I'm beginning to think if winning the Colosseum might be a realistic prospect, the number 1 spot on the Carnage roster. The reward would be a Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification and 9 gold amulets, prizes that anyone would gladly die for, which was one of the best kinds of rewards that Lu Yi could ever dream of. He could still remember the experience of losing that Tertius-level arcane glade. But he did not feel sorry at all. If anything, a Tertius-level arcane glade that had limited growth potential was more of a burden than a boon to him. But a Primus-level arcane glade would be different. Immensely different. While having one might not be urgent to him, it would definitely be a great help to Li Baxian, Feng Yuechan, and also Zhu Jia. Having an arcane glade in this class would make it easier for them. They would no longer have to roam around looking for rewards and prizes while endangering themselves. Though this would still be slower than using amulets, it would be safer and steadier. However, what mattered the most to Lu Yi were the 9 gold amulets. At present, Lu Yi had enough amulets to reach the 4th Order. But he was still in dire need of more to get stronger. Needless to say, it was Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's presence that had given him both the courage and confidence to conceive the inspiration of winning the Carnage Coliseum. They were hardly the average garden variety Cloud River Realm cultivators, and even though they were just 4th Orders, they could easily give opponents 2 ranks beyond a run for their money. If he could work with them and win the first prize, he could divide the prize evenly with them. That would mean 3 gold amulets apiece. A prize that would make him progress even faster through the 4th Order and save him a lot of time and trouble. In the meantime, he had to admit that he might very well be one of the weakest cultivators now in the Carnage Coliseum in terms of his cultivation rank. Nevertheless, to him this could also be a form of advantage. An advantage in the form of gaining extra Carnage points whenever he slayed an enemy. Like contribution points, more carnage points would be awarded if he were to kill an enemy if compared to Li Baxin killing one. In other words, with most of the enemies in the Colosseum being 8th and 9th orders, Lu Yi could slay an enemy 5th order and he would receive 3 times what most people earned when they also slayed a 5th order. If he slayed a 6th order, others would have to slay 4 to catch up. Hence, while it was easy for 8th and 9th orders to kill enemies weaker than them, the gain in carnage points for Lu Yi would increase to commensurate with the difference between his cultivation rank and his opponents. That would make this an advantage to Lu Yi in comparison, since he possessed the power to defeat opponents of ranks higher than his. With his prowess, he could easily have any ordinary 5th orders for breakfast, and the addition of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan now made even defeating 6th orders a virtual certainty. As for enemies of the 7th order and beyond, Lu Yi decided that they should avoid crossing paths with any if able. That would leave 8th and 9th orders untouchable. All 3 of them would never be able to defeat one, even on their best days. The difference was just too great, but so long as ample arrangements had been set in place, Lu Yi was at least sure that they would be able to escape unscathed. It was the moment when he realized that he was number 1 on the Carnage roster, plus the rendezvous with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, that the embers of his ambition were lit. Even so, Lu Yi understood fully how risky and dangerous this daring do was going to be, and how they needed to be extremely careful moving forward. So, you're thinking of going for the top spot, brother? Li Baxin's brows peaked with apparent exhilaration. It would have been a fool's errand if the situation were otherwise, but with him now already in first place with such a huge lead, it seemed realistic. All they had to do was defend and maintain their lead until the end of the Colosseum. So be it then, brother. If winning this Colosseum is what you wish, said Li Baxin with enthusiasm, then both Yuechan and I will give you all the help you need. Well, for starters, I'd need your help watching the place while I fashion more ward flags. He might have just obtained a fresh supply of ward flags from the belongings of the poor ward cultivator he had slain, but it wouldn't be enough. With full anticipation of pandemonium, especially since all 3 of them were weaker in comparison to other contestants of the Colosseum, he would need even more ward flags to create some insurance. Only with enough ward flags could he construct more magical wards, which would be critical for his plan to work, and to ensure everyone's safety, which was the paramount concern of all, since champions and elites of the 8th and 9th order teemed the vast length and width of the Colosseum. The materials that he had bought from the Divine Trade Association were still plenty. He could still forge several hundred ward flags with them, but the process would involve the emission of spiritual power, and that might invite unwanted attention. To that end, Lu Yi had to construct another magical ward, one with the express purpose of masking any spiritual power signature. So long as he could keep the emissions to a minimum, they would be able to stay undetected. Time passed slowly as Lu Yi went to work with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan resting and recuperating while they stood vigil. The materials depleted quickly enough and the ward flags grew from stacks into heaps and into mounds. In the meantime, the carnage outside never stopped. Champions and elites waged war on each other, doing their best to improve their ranks on the carnage roster. That included Xiao Yang, currently the roster's number 2 and a champion of the Raving Bladesmen, who had ascended into the Cloud River realm with 360 spiritual points unlocked. He was unequivocally and undeniably the most dangerous cultivator in the Colosseum. He was outscored by Lu Yi when the Carnage roster first appeared, although he quickly caught up and locked the first place up by killing and maiming non-stop until Lu Yi overtook him again, this time by a mile because of the 1,000 Carnage points increment, and left him in the second place for good. Xiao Yang had never felt so humiliated and exasperated before. If he had been suspecting that the Lu Yi in the first place could be the rumored Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect, he was definitely sure of it now. The 1,000 Carnage point increment was all the proof Xiao Yang needed to be sure that Lu Yi wasn't a high-tier Cloud River realm cultivator. This matched all the information he had received about the young Crimson Blood sect acolyte, although he could not yet explain how Lu Yi had succeeded in holding onto the special gold amulet for the whole 24 hours. He had been actively scouring the Colosseum for signs of Lu Yi, but his search had yet to turn up anything useful. The vastness of the Colosseum's area was not as big as he feared, however. It was still wide enough for anyone to hide unless he had the means to pinpoint his quarry. At any rate, Xiao Yang was certain that Lu Yi was weaker than him. The skulking weakling must be cowering somewhere, hiding like a rodent in its lair. Which was true. For one day and night, Lu Ye's carnage points remained unchanged at 1,790, while his had risen up to 1,600. Just a few more kills and he would catch up and regain the top spot. Chapter 512 The Hunt. Lu Yi was finally ready. So were Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. With tons worth of ward flags sitting in mountains inside the subterranean cavern, they were ready to rumble. They stood up together. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan both extracted something together and slapped it on their faces. Lu Yi looked. Face masks. Li Baxian's was a rosy-lipped and ivory-teethed mask of a boy grinning, whilst Feng Yuechan's was one depicting a tearful girl with a mourning and baleful expression. Li Baxian extracted and offered one more to Lu Yi. Here, take this one. Makes it easier for us to operate. Without a word, Lu Yi retrieved from inside his storage sphere a face mask with the visage of a hideous and fanged demon and put it on. Li Baxian was surprised, but he quickly burst into a giggle. I see. You've come prepared. All three of them were being targeted by cultivators of the Thousand Demon Ridge. It was only natural and expected that all three of them would share the same idea of preparing enough face masks for their own use. They got out of the cave and kept their spiritual power signatures low. Then they chose a bearing and headed that way. Their motive might be to secure Lu Ye's lead on the first place of the Carnage roster, but safety remained their first and foremost concern, meaning that they would be operating within range of this cave. If anything were to happen, this cave would be the point where they would retreat. Too far and they might not be able to make it back here safely. That way they could fall back to the cave if they encountered enemies beyond their ability to defeat, and use the teleportation wards to escape. Hence the ideal range would be 10 to a dozen miles. But that would greatly limit the scope of their operations. They could only wait for potential targets to pass by instead of launching attacks on others freely. Lu Yi had shared his ideas of sticking within range of the cave with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan prior to setting off, and they agreed to the idea. While they could plead guilty to feeling enticed by the prizes of winning first place, they acknowledged the soundness of his idea that safety would remain their paramount concern. Launching attacks might provide a lot of initiative, but it could also be risky all the same. But now that they had formulated a plan, all they needed to do was stick to it. They stopped a quarter of an hour later, hardly 20 miles away from the cave. Lu Yi studied the surroundings and gave a couple of curt nods to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. There was no need for further communication. The latter two sped away in different directions where they would maintain a perimeter. At the same time, Yi materialized and headed in a third direction, doing the same. Alone, Lu Yi extracted his ward flags one after another, and began constructing a magical ward. He was going to build wards not for killing but for restraining enemies. That could buy them some time while they escaped if they were to encounter anyone too powerful or dangerous. The ward would be manually activated, not automatically triggered. That would ensure that it could be used to its greatest effect at the right moment. Every now and then, elite cultivators might zip by overhead. But thanks to the perimeter maintained by the others, the early warning they provided allowed Lu Yi to keep himself invisible to prevent detection. Constructing the magical wards took 2 hours. With the preparations now completed, everyone waited in hiding. It had been 3 days since the Carnage Coliseum first opened, and many cultivators had chosen to band up and move around in groups. Despite receiving fewer rewards individually, this could at least provide greater protection. Those who still roamed around alone were at least 7th orders. Confident enough about themselves, only they could move around alone without fear of being in danger. Silence pervaded the forest where they remained patiently in waiting. High up in the sky, changes never stopped occurring to the blood-red pennant that was the Carnage roster, with Xiao Yang swiftly and steadily raking in spades after spades of Carnage points in his race to the top. At his current pace, it would not be long before he caught up with Lu Yi and overtook him. 2 hours turned into 4. The idle vigil remained a fruitless, if futile, wait. They sat on pins and needles as the waiting game became a frustrating and seemingly endless ordeal. There were still a huge number of cultivators around, but the vastness of the Colosseum made everyone scatter, especially with the need to maintain caution. Hardly anyone was eager to reveal themselves. More so, ghost cultivators who flit from hither to thither unseen and unnoticed. All of a sudden, A flicker of light crept into his sight. Lu Yi panned his gaze that way, and there it was, a tiny speck of white light bobbing lazily just under a tree not far away from his position. He was sure that it was not there moments ago. It had just appeared. Just like that. And he knew what it was. That had to be another one of those prizes that the heavens scatter all around the Colosseum every now and then, an endowment. He had encountered one before which gave him a white amulet. So this is how endowments appear. Lu Yi realized, gaining a deeper understanding of how cruel and callous the enigmatic entity, the heavens, could be. Every day, the heavens would select a person and bestow them a golden amulet. Every day, the token of providence spectacle, another contrivance of the heavens, would take place to distribute amulets to anyone nearby. Aside from all those events were also random endowments like this, to say nothing of the carnage roster that hung high up in the sky for everyone to see. All these events existed only for one reason, to incite skirmishes and conflicts amongst all cultivators in the vicinity. The heavens were like an invisible hand, prodding the cultivators so that more blood could be spilled everywhere in the Colosseum. "Brother," Li Baxian's message came suddenly. "Yeah, I saw it," Lu Yi responded. What was initially a futile wait had just changed into a real hunt, despite his earlier concern that this was going to be a fruitless wild goose chase. And true enough, merely a few minutes later, Lu Yi spied 4 figures appearing in the distance. Carefully and meticulously, the 4 had separated into groups of 2 that approached from 2 different directions. But without the abilities unique only to ghost cultivators, they could not fully mask their tracks. Keeping their spiritual power signatures as low as possible was pretty much everything they could do. Patiently, these strangers did not make a beeline straight for the white speck of light. Instead, they moved inward very slowly as if they were scanning for booby traps. The strangers would have discovered Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan with such cautious methods, but fortunately, Lu Yi had earlier constructed magical wards that could mask their spiritual power signatures to a great extent that so long as the enemies did not have extraordinarily acute spiritual senses, they would not be detected. With glyph concealment, Lu Yi himself was as undetectable as a ghost cultivator. 2 of them passed just 10 meters away from Lu Ye's position without noticing anything, while the remaining 2 were heading straight towards Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's position. "I'm gonna make the first strike, brother," Li Baxian communicated again. Lu Yi did not respond. He was not at all perturbed by the number of enemies. That these enemies operated in a group indicated a certain possibility that they might not be high-tier cultivators. If anything, Lu Yi would be more worried if it were just a lone cultivator who came. A flash of light slashed through the gloomy dimness of the jungle, followed closely by a piercing ring of steel as Li Baxian broke cover. More than a dozen shafts of light hovered in the air like a bunch of swarming wasps, and as one, they barreled straight after one of the strangers. The sudden attack caught all 4 strangers unaware, the ones heading towards Li Baxian most of all. Their faces fell with shock and awe that gripped them. Right in that second, their hair stood on end as they felt danger. True and overwhelming danger. One of them cried, "Ambush!" Every one of them produced their weapons and brandished them at the massing shafts of light streaking towards them. There was no telling to which faction the 4 strangers belonged. But Li Baxian, after his long years of experience as a sword cultivator, could freely control his many shafts of light as if they were the very digits on his hand, and he could stop them before committing any mistakes the moment he realized who they were. Which happened fast enough. The moment the skirmish broke out, he saw who they were. If they were Grand Sky Coalition allies, Li Baxian would immediately stand down. But if they were Thousand Demon Ridge enemies, then the initiative could ensure that he could at least cut down one opponent in the first exchange itself. The moment the word "ambush" left the stranger's lips, the truth was revealed. Both red and blue blazed brightly in the gloominess of the jungle. Launching the attack was hardly the only thing Li Baxian was doing. Looking and observing, he was trying to make out the ranks of the 4 strangers. The sudden ambush would have easily rattled them enough to display their power fully. And he was right, there was nothing for him to be afraid of. The 2 strangers, one a 5th order and the other a 4th order, were minor threats to him. The pair near Lu Ye's position sprang into action. One of them, a burly and tall mountain of a man whose girth suggested that he could be a body-tempering cultivator, began to race to the aid of his comrades. The other one, presumably a spell cultivator, began channeling his spiritual power. The body-tempering cultivator had barely reached far enough when he was greeted by an astonishing sight. A barrage of more than a dozen sword-like shafts of searing white incandescence had rained down on his comrades and had failed to kill them, but more were homing in on them. Li Baxuan had gone easy on the first exchange. After all, he needed to ascertain if the four strangers could be Grand Sky Coalition allies. But once he made sure, he unleashed more and he was still far from reaching his limit. Li Baxuan could already conjure and control up to 100 shafts of light back when he was still in the Spirit Creek realm. Reaching the fourth order of the Cloud River realm meant that his bar had risen. Sword cultivators have always been known for their aptitude in killing, and unless his opponents were at least 2 ranks beyond his, few could possibly withstand Li Baxuan's wrath. The radiance of the multitudinous bolts of light illuminated the dimness of the jungle, as they ripped through the 2 enemy cultivators' protective aura, perforating them like a sieve with blood streaming out of every wound they rendered. The gaps between ranks within the Cloud River realm were as huge as a canyon. Both enemy cultivators were at least fully fledged 4th and 5th orders, but all that meant nothing in the face of Li Baxuan's skill and experience. In just one exchange, 1 4th order and 1 5th order were nearly dead. In fact, Li Baxuan would have been able to slay them all outright if not for the fact that he was intentionally keeping them alive, or half dead, for Lu Yi. The body-tempering cultivator who was on his way towards his comrades could feel his blood curdling the moment the sight of them crashing to the ground and the grinning boy mask panning towards him hit him. Deep down inside, he grappled with panic at facing off against such a formidable opponent. His legs stopped moving, not realizing that he had just involuntarily become a sitting duck. A thunderbolt came out of nowhere, whipping him and nearly knocking him to the ground. He jerked his head sideways and there was a female to his flank not far away, wearing the mask of a tearful girl, obviously the pair of the man in the grinning boy mask just now. There's more than one ambush here, he realized. The body-tempering cultivator was panicking. Behind him, his spell cultivator colleague howled, "Run!" The spell cultivator had only just finished channeling his power, and was ready to charge when he saw first his 2 colleagues being cut down like a tornado tearing through a town before seeing the body-tempering cultivator being pummeled by another spell. That was enough reason for him to turn tail and flee. Hurling his spell straight at Feng Yuechan, he channeled another surge of spiritual power and took into the air to escape. But he did not manage to fly high enough. His feet were barely 1 foot over the ground when a massive force crashed into him from above before he felt the bite of steel gnawing through his flesh and bone. The fiery red glimmer of the steel blasted apart the protective aura that bristled the surface of the spell cultivator's skin, slicing through his sinews and crunching through his bones down the length of his back. He crashed to the ground a lifeless cadaver. He did not notice that there was someone waiting to strike from behind. Chapter 513 Having a Go at Me. Li Baxuan and Feng Yuechan's ambush had taken up all of the enemy cultivator's attention, and the enemy spell cultivator did not notice another opponent behind him. By the time Lu Yi had delivered his blow, it was too late. He instantly crashed to the ground after barely taking flight. The impact left him breathless and dizzy for a second before he saw the glint of steel descending down on him. Frantically, the spell cultivator channeled his spiritual power, and summoned his protective aura only to watch it shatter 3 seconds after it materialized by the blow falling on his head. The air was rent with the sound of steel as the spell cultivator bore the brunt of the blows falling in interweaving flurries. The loud impacts echoed as the spell cultivator's entire form trembled and convulsed under the weight of the onslaught. The protective aura's integrity ultimately crumbled under the relentless assault, leaving him exposed and open to the next barrage of steel that easily ripped him apart, body and soul. With his vision and life slowly ebbing away, the spell cultivator collapsed. Lu Yi raced to rejoin the others. Feng Yuechan had not stopped firing spell after spell at the body-tempering cultivator to keep him busy while Li Baxuan's profuse shafts of light soared around like a tempest, preventing the incapacitated enemy cultivators from being rescued. With a wave of his hand, the shafts of light withdrew the moment he saw Lu Yi speedily approaching, and he directed them at the enemy body-tempering cultivator. The pair of heavily wounded cultivators had not even exhaled with relief when Lu Yi was already upon them. All it took was a couple of swishes and the two men crumpled to the floor, as dead as a pair of doornails. Lu Yi would not have been able to dispatch them both with such ease if it were under normal circumstances. Both a fourth and fifth order could easily give him a hard time. It was Li Baxian's successful ambush that had incapacitated them badly enough for anyone or even an ordinary third order to deliver the final coup de grace. With the two finally dealt with, Lu Yi rejoined the others in dealing with the final enemy remaining, the body-tempering cultivator. Mere seconds had passed since Feng Yuechan engaged the body-tempering cultivator, and the addition of Li Baxian into the fray had left the enemy cultivator littered with wounds all over him. The burly enemy failed to keep up with the intensity and speed of the swarming shafts of light, and Feng Yuechan's spells were not making things easier. One after another, the spells hammered into him like a battering ram that the shield spirit artifact that he was using had long been knocked out of his grasp. But with Lu Yi joining in, his fate was as sealed as a fully nailed coffin. Seconds later, the giant body-tempering cultivator of a man crashed to the ground. Lu Yi bolted after the speck of white light still bobbing in midair and thrust his hand into it. He felt his fingers closing in on something solid and seized it. Then he raced around to collect the ward flags that he had placed around the site of the battle without even a look at what he had retrieved from the white light of the endowment. In the meantime, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan cleared up the dead bodies and stripped them of anything useful. "Let's go," Lu Yi called everyone. All three of them hurried back to the cave. To remain safe would mean that they should not dawdle at the site of the battle. The skirmish might have been a short one, but the commotion it caused could have attracted the attention of anyone, or any enemies nearby. Fighting and moving like that might be a big hassle, but it was the safer way. A quarter of an hour later, everyone was back inside the cave, seated on the ground. "I've taken a look at the carnage roster, brother. The increase of carnage points on the first name is the same as what you should be getting after those kills. I guess that means that it really is you," said Li Baxian. That was true. Lu Yi had taken a quick peek at the carnage roster himself on the way back here. The 4 enemies that he had slain, 3 fifth orders and 1 fourth order, should garner him 430 carnage points. Since the number tallied with the gain of carnage points on the leading Lu Yi name at the first place of the roster, that would mean that it really was him. That was a very rewarding attempt. Most high-tier cultivators, including the second-place Xiaoliang, could only rake in 500 carnage points on average every day. Yet in one skirmish alone, Lu Yi had gotten more than 400 points, an amount that almost caught up to what Xiaoliang could earn in one day. Xiaoliang's carnage points total was so close to catching up with Lu Yi at first. One could almost guess how Xiaoliang would react when he saw himself being further down in the list again. Never before in the history of the Carnage Coliseum since its inception where a third order, not even anyone below the seventh order, managed to stay so comfortably at the first place of the Carnage roster. The usual contenders that led at the first 3 spots of the Carnage rosters were usually 8, if not 9th orders. In fact, most of the time the top 3 spots were usually occupied by 9th orders. While there have been champions who had tried using the handicap to have a low-tier cultivator rake in as many kills as possible to win more points, to really pull off such a trick was easier said than done. To capitalize on the advantage offered by the handicap, certain conditions had to be met, the foremost being that the cultivator concerned must not exceed the 5th order, as the increments gained beyond this point would be too low to warrant any significant benefit. To say nothing of the unexpected incidents that could be potentially disastrous, even with a 5th order piggybacking a 9th order. Most 9th orders got into fights involving at least 1 or more 9th orders from the opposing faction. That would mean that the 9th order would not be able to properly provide enough protection for his or her weaker partner, especially during a very fierce battle. If anything were to happen to the weaker partner, the carnage points that had been accumulated would be lost, making the whole endeavor a fool's errand. If not for Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's arrival, plus that unique gold amulet event the reward of which had propelled him to the top of the Carnage roster and provided him with a sound basis for this adventurous undertaking, Lu Yi would not have conceived the idea of wanting to contest for the first prize. He would rather hide somewhere safe and wait until the Colosseum ended. Everyone laid the booty they had collected on the ground before Lu Yi, so that he could undo the magical seal of the storage bags. Undoing the seals had now become as easy as drawing inviolable from its sheath. It took just a few moments for him to finish opening all of the storage bags, which he divided into 3 portions. 2 of these portions he handed to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Next, he emptied the bags of their contents. This time there wasn't anything valuable. It was time he had a look at whatever it was he got from the endowment speck of light. He had grabbed it and stuffed it into his storage sphere in his haste to vacate the site of the battle earlier. But when he took it out, to his surprise, it was a flower. A magical flower. The last time he got something from an endowment like this, it yielded a white amulet. But his guess was spot on. The endowments that scattered all over the Colosseum really did come in various types, shapes, and sizes. Lu Yi knew little about medicine and herbs, hence he could not tell what kind of magical flower it was or what its properties and medicinal functions were. Right now he could only surmise that it wasn't anything rare or precious. But whatever it was, it could wait until he had the chance to meet Shui Yuan and hand it to her. It was to Lu Ye's favor that the wait wasn't too long and the battle ended quickly. Lu Yi and his companions were not yet spent, but they decided to wait out inside the cave for another couple of hours to make sure that the earlier battle had not attracted the focus of anyone dangerous. When the wait was finally up, they stepped out of the cave. They headed for more than a dozen miles in another direction until they found a spot where Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan split off again like the last time to allow Lu Yi to begin setting up his magical ward. Once the trap was ready, they waited to spring their trap. Last time, success only came because of the sudden appearance of that endowment. It attracted a bunch of 1,000 demon-rich cultivators that ultimately became their prey. But this time they waited for more than a day and a night. Many cultivators had passed by their hiding spot, but every one of them was at least 7th orders and above, which Lu Yi and his companions would rather give a wide berth. It was almost evening when they finally saw a group of 3 passing by. Li Baxian revealed himself first to draw their attention. But when he attacked, he realized that his battlefield imprint did not have any reaction at all. He immediately withdrew his attack, much to the panic and surprise of all 3 strangers, although they quickly realized that this was just a big misunderstanding. They were allied cultivators from Grand Sky Coalition. Now that their affiliations have been made clear, there was no reason to involve any hostilities. Li Baxian had a quick talk with them to explain everything, and the 3 scurried away at once. Hence the wait went on. There was no telling if any more prey would wander this way, and if there were, they could be members of the Grand Sky Coalition, which was a question where the answer would be revealed only during an attack on the prey. Nevertheless, both Li Baxian and Lu Yi did not grow weary or restless at all. They understood very well that right now, here in the large expanse of the Colosseum, their cultivation remained their single most glaring weakness. 3rd and 4th orders were the flesh that the strong feasted on. Hence, to make sure that their safety was ensured, patience and fortitude were crucial elements to their plan. Hours passed before another group of 3 passed by. Li Baxian spearheaded the ambush again, and this time, his battlefield imprint throbbed. It glowed bright and blue whilst the imprints of the 3 blazed with a fiery red luminescence. The marauders reaped success. Li Baxian badly injured one while wounding the remaining 2 in the first contact, and by the time Feng Yuechan joined in the fight, the victory was sealed. This also proved Lu Ye's earlier hypothesis that most low-tier cultivators traveled in groups. Those of the 7th order and beyond usually operated alone. The 3,000 demon-rich cultivators were all 5th orders, and the combined element of surprise by both Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan easily trampled whatever defense they attempted in their moment of desperation. All Lu Yi had to do during the gritting battle was maintain his cover and stealthily join in. At the end of the battle, all that was left were 3 dead bodies reeking of blood and success, which had translated to a 360 carnage points increment. Somewhere far away, Xiao Liang lifted his head to look at the carnage roster, and what he saw struck such disbelief into him that the corners of his eyes throbbed. Is that Lu Yi having a go at me? He had been feeling that way since Lu Yi had raked in 1,000 carnage points and dethroned him from the first spot. He had been roaming far and wide lately, looking for any Grand Sky Coalition cultivators he could sink his blade into to garner more carnage points. Every day, he had been rushing to catch up to Lu Yi, but just when he thought he was going to overtake Lu Yi, the latter would suddenly gain several hundred carnage points, casting him further behind once again. Just when the gap between their carnage points was only 100 or so, it turned into 400 plus again. Damn you! Xiaoliang cursed quietly. But that was not all. As if he was not annoyed and frustrated enough, there was one more problem on his plate. A Grand Sky Coalition Ninth Order had been hunting and harassing him. The unknown Ninth Order wasn't high up on the Carnage roster. He was somewhere in the teens. Lacking enough luck, his chance of getting within the top 3 places was steadily slipping out of sight. Therefore, this unknown Ninth Order had abandoned his earlier vocation and had somehow devoted himself to harassing and sabotaging Xiaoliang, all the while keeping himself unseen as he kept closely behind the Raving Bladesman champion. Xiaoliang would have easily defeated the Ninth Order if it were open combat. But this mysterious Ninth Order was smart enough to employ guerrilla tactics that even he could barely find a way around, and that annoyed him immensely. Chapter 514 Trap Ward. Days went by with the trio of Lu Yi, Li Baxian, and Feng Yuechan complying strictly with the tactic of shifting to another location after a successful bushwhacking, reaping rewards almost every day from at least 300 to 500 carnage points each time. The accumulation of points this way showed how well the plan was working. There weren't many changes to the rankings on the Carnage roster, but one second-place Xiaoliang seemed to be beleaguered by some manner of difficulty that his gain in Carnage points had slowed to the point where he was almost out of the top 10 names on the roster. At the moment, the new claimant to the second place on the roster was someone known as Tan Shang. Lu Yi recognized the name. He could recall seeing this name back when the Carnage roster first appeared, easily making him a possible Ninth Order too. As far as he could remember, Tan Shang hailed from a Tier 2000 Demon Ridge Order. As a cultivator wielding considerable strength and influence, he was a former top 10 on the Spirit Creek Battlefield's Role of Supremacy. Most of the champions now lording over the Cloud River battlefield were once elites of the Spirit Creek Battlefield's Role of Supremacy at one point. In his many years of being in the Spirit Creek realm, Li Baxian had watched with his own eyes generations of cultivators coming and going. Many he knew and some he had even fought against before. Even amongst the current crop of Cloud River realm elites, there were few who had not had the chance to meet him before, standing either side by side or against him in battle some time ago. This has become some form of advantage for Li Baxian, who could still be retaining vast connections everywhere. The raids on any unsuspecting cultivators unlucky enough to have stepped into their trap have been effortless lately, with Li Baxian's prowess and deadliness, which usually resolved the outcome in the first exchange of blows alone. Added with Feng Yuechan, the battle would usually have been decided by the time Lu Yi sprung out to mop up the rest of the resistance. But there was one notable skirmish that had been rather difficult. A Sixth Order was embedded as part of the group they waylaid, and it took a concerted effort from all 3 of them to finally put him down after Lu Yi was done with the rest of the Sixth Order's squad. All 3 of them, Li Baxian, Feng Yuechan, and Lu Yi, were once former number 1s of the Role of Supremacy when they were still in the Spirit Creek realm. Each of them wielded the ability to defeat opponents beyond their ranks, and so long as their opponent did not boast of any remarkable talents, experience, or even skill, there were few targets that their combined strength could not conquer. Another successful raid had just ended when Lu Yi looked up. The Carnage points tally following his name registered 3,740. That was 1,000 Carnage points ahead of second place Tan Shang, who was still eating the dust of Lu Ye's unstoppable lead. Tan Shang's chances of catching up were feeling more like a mirage in the desert by the minute. Next second, he caught sight of a bolt of light streaking this way. In the blink of an eye, it reached their position and the light made a sharp swerve and landed right in front of them. Lu Ye's eyes contracted with shock. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan tensed up warily, expecting the worst. The battlefield imprints on their hands flickered with a bright blue illumination. On the stranger's hand, they spied the scarlet-red glow blazing conspicuously. The huge pressure of facing off against a formidable enemy petrified them all, as if they had been hit by an electric jolt. For Lu Yi recognized who it was. It was the same enemy he saw Xiao Chanqian fighting back then. He did not know his name then, and he still didn't know his name now. But he did know that this enemy was a Ninth Order. Far too many times they had tempted fate, and finally, woe had descended upon them, both suddenly and jarringly. Clearly, the commotion from the last fight had drawn him here. Standing side by side, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan quietly channeled their power in preparation to strike. A similarly grim-faced Lu Yi too barely moved an inch. None of them would dare to break the stillness so long as Wei Kei remained motionless. Wei Kei panned his gaze around. He surveyed Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Then he returned his gaze to Lu Yi. All he saw were 3 different masks staring back at him. But amber perched on Lu Ye's shoulder was all the proof he needed. Cracking a grin, he exclaimed, "Aha! Found you at last." He was absolutely elated. For days he had been hunting for Lu Yi to no avail, and fate had finally decided to reward his determination and resolve by putting Lu Yi right before him. Imagine ranging across lands hundreds of thousands of miles in length and combing through so many cultivators, all for one particular individual. From the Carnage roster, he had deduced that Lu Yi had not been idle at all. The daily gain of several hundred Carnage points had been proof enough. In the meantime, he too had been busy. As a Ninth Order who preferred operating alone like the rest of his ilk, he had roamed everywhere, found his fair share of endowment rewards, and participated in several Token of Providence events, all of which have been tremendously fruitful even though he had not devoted himself to earning Carnage points. His name was somewhere in the late teens at present. One might as well argue that Wei Kei had little ambition in competing for a good place on the Carnage roster. Hunting down Lu Yi and slaying him had been his prime purpose. Though the rewards of winning the top spot on the Carnage roster were undeniably enticing, they barely came close to beating the combined bounty offered by all Thousand Demon Ridge sects and orders for Lu Ye's head. The amount of supplies that he would receive for Lu Ye's head was just too good. So good that he wondered that it might even outlast his entire lifetime. Hence, since the beginning, his target had always been Lu Yi. He was just passing by in the vicinity when the violent emission of spiritual power signatures from the battle caught his attention. Little did he expect that his curious move of coming over to have a look would result in him stumbling upon the very person he had been combing the Colosseum for. The face mask was different, but amber, plus inviolable now still in Lu Ye's grasp, were all the signs Wei Kei needed to confirm Lu Ye's identity. As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Kei immediately fired a spell. It was a spell fired casually by the Thousand Demon Ridge Ninth Order. But even an arbitrary attack like that was deadly enough for Lu Yi. Before it even took form, it screamed through the air, and by the time it materialized as a full-fledged projectile of spiritual power, it was mere feet away from Lu Yi. The latter frantically mustered his power, and the luminescent shield of glyph protection came into shape before him. The air wailed. Several shafts of light slammed in rapid succession into the spell's projectile, trying to whittle down its force. Li Baxian had realized that the attack was not one that Lu Yi would be able to take, hence he chose to protect Lu Yi instead of attacking Wei Quebec. But he was not the only one. Even Feng Yuechan helped as well. Nevertheless, their combined efforts had not been able to fully defeat the spell in its entirety. With a bang, the eruption of force when the bolt hit and shattered the glyph protection shield, knocking Lu Yi into the air, and he crashed to the ground. Wei Kei snorted coldly as he waved his hand at the directions of Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Luminescent lines appeared in midair, joining and intersecting quickly to form a huge round disc pulsing with rich spiritual power. The disc released invisible blades of wind howling through the air and slashed straight at Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. He had intentionally dialed down the strength of his attack on Lu Yi. The last thing he needed was a fully unrecognizable corpse. Lu Ye's head needed to be intact for him to claim his bounty. As for Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, there was no need to hold back at all. The many shafts of light surged in torrents back to Li Baxian, forming a wide wall of swords in front of him, while Feng Yuechan worked her magic and mists rose, coagulating into a gigantic golem towering 10 meters over her. But the wind blades easily blasted through the cloud giant, and it burst into a shapeless mass of dissipating mists, while Li Baxian's wall of swords shattered into splinters after just a split second of resistance. Right before they were in any danger, Feng Yuechan conjured her umbrella-shaped spirit artifact. The object radiated a burst of spiritual power the moment it opened, forming an energy shield that managed to withstand the deadly onslaught that slammed in successive barrages on the shield. A spell artifact? Wei Kei gasped, recognizing the magical umbrella for what it was. At the same time, he started to wonder about Feng Yuechan's identity. A Cloud River Realm cultivator armed with a spell artifact must make her a very special individual. Deep inside, he was doubled over with glee. He could thank the stars for not only finding Lu Yi, but also to prey who would ensure a future of plenty and abundance. First and foremost, Lu Yi. Ignoring Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, Wei Ke lunged forward, homing in on his main prize Lu Yi. As a spell cultivator, he should be maintaining his distance from his opponents. Yet he was confident being 6 ranks above Lu Yi, and he wanted to prevent causing too much damage and blowing Lu Yi to pieces. Hence, he decided to stay close and do whatever he could to incapacitate Lu Yi. Yet his advance did not even reach 50 meters when Lu Yi leaped into the air. Wei Ke spied the ward flag in his grasp, something Lu Yi was not holding earlier, and Lu Yi began waving it furiously. A deafening hum rang like a bell's toll, and sheets of light rose up instantaneously around him, forming a dome more than dozens of meters wide. Wei Ke did not see this coming at all, and there he was, trapped inside the dome of light. A magical ward. Wei Ke muttered a curse under his breath. He did not expect a magical ward, least of all a trap ward. No, I cannot let Lu Yi escape. His hand shot up and he fired an aureate bolt of light straight at where Lu Yi. Only Lu Yi was long gone. He had escaped from the ward's area the moment he activated it, exiting unimpeded with his ward flag while the golden energy bolt smacked harmlessly into the wall of light that came up just in time and leaving an inconsequential ripple sweeping across its surface. This trap ward looked very similar to a defensive ward, although they were essentially different. Cultivators inside a defensive ward were safe from attacks from the outside. But unlike defensive wards, trap wards prevented damage from the inside reaching the outside, effectively keeping any cultivators caught inside fully confined so long as the ward still existed. All in all, defensive wards were to prevent external attacks while trap wards were to prevent attacks from within. Few would have been able to tell the difference at first glance despite their stark contrast. To escape a trap ward, one had to destroy the ward. And as the caster of the ward, Lu Yi with the ward flag with him, could move in and out of the ward freely. This was the root of the confidence that compelled him to compete for the first spot on the Carnage roster despite being a third order. With the assistance of Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, Lu Yi had nothing to be afraid of when dealing with other Cloud River Realm cultivators of mediocre strength and power. Even when they were faced with enemies too dangerous and formidable, they could rely on trap wards to buy them enough time to escape. Time which would ensure a safe flight away from the scene of battle. By the time the trap ward was revealed, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan had already taken to the sky and sped away as fast as they could. Lu Yi might have had a later start, but with glyphs, wings and windwalk both activated, he demonstrated speed that outstripped even Li Baxian and caught up to them soon enough. Inside the trap ward, Wei Ke could only watch Lu Yi fleeing with frustration and resentment. He was so close to killing Lu Yi and achieving a life of wealth and prosperity. With his spiritual power mustered, he fired spell after spell at the glowing walls of light around him, eliciting an endless symphony of ripples that spread across the trap ward's dome-like shield as its brightness gradually waned. But the thunderous emission of spiritual power from the relentless slew of spells only served to remind Lu Yi and his companions to hasten. The trap ward might have worked nicely, but they were well aware that it would only hold for a short period of time. The exact duration would depend on what Wei Ke could do to defeat the ward and free himself. Chapter 515: A String of Unfortunate Events. Huge energy blasts never stopped hammering at the luminescent walls of the trap ward. Waves and waves of spiritual power emission surged from inside, and the brightness of the walls was growing dimmer at speeds that the naked eye could see. Lu Yi had employed 8 ward keystones and several more flags for this trap ward. But it was just a hastily constructed magical ward that was subsistent on spirit stones, making it mediocre at best. The strength of a magical ward had everything to do with both the amounts of spiritual power stored in the ward and the richness of ambient spiritual qi in the atmosphere. The more spiritual power was used in the ward, and the richer the ambient spiritual qi in the air around it was, the stronger and more potent the magical ward would be. That would make newly constructed wards weakest because they had not yet been able to draw enough spiritual qi from the atmosphere, with or without the addition of spirit stones. With time, a magical ward would store enough spiritual power to allow its potency to grow to its peak. The biggest advantage of this particular trap ward that Lu Yi had constructed was its smaller range of barely 60 meters. That had helped to enhance its strength. Nevertheless, it would take more than that to fully thwart a Cloud River Realm Ninth Order like Wei Quebec. In less than 20 seconds, the glow of the dome of the trap ward turned fully dark before it finally shattered. Liberated from his temporary confinement, Wei Ke took to the sky and began streaking towards where Lu Yi and the others had vanished. He could not allow this chance to slip past his fingers. It was only luck that he had managed to stumble into Lu Yi, and this chance could never come by again. But as far as Wei Ke was concerned, he was confident. The bunch of third and fourth orders might have fled, but even a 20-second head start wouldn't prevent him from catching up. He gazed into the distance and spied a few sparkles of light in the distance. Recognizing his fleeing quarry, channeling his power, Wei Ke turned into a streaking shooting star himself to give chase. At the same time, Lu Yi jerked his head around. He had felt a dangerous presence incoming and seeing a speck of light in the distance coming their way. He knew that Wei Ke had managed to free himself from the trap ward. But it was as he had expected. The trap ward that he had constructed could only delay a Ninth Order for 20 seconds at most. Nevertheless, that was all the time he needed. All three of them ignored the imminent threat and focused on gaining as much speed as possible, flying quickly and covering more than a dozen miles before they finally arrived at their destination. They landed just outside the cave and dashed inside, making for its innermost caverns where they stood together in the teleportation ward and activated it. The lines of the magical ward shone with a sudden radiance, a magical glow that traced every single line of the ward, while illuminating the rock chamber. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan could only watch with awe and surprise. They had used the divine opportunity column to travel, but never anything like this, hence the fresh and new experience. The well-seasoned amber lifted both its paws and wrapped them around Lu Ye's neck, its citron eyes palpitating with anticipation. As the teleportation ward began operating, Lu Yi ripped Inviolable out of its sheath, sending a glowing scythe that darted towards the spot where the explosive wards were. A deafening bang rocked the entire cave amid an eruption of searing flames and blinding brilliance that caused rocks and debris to crash down from the ceiling. By the time the tumult died down, the place had turned into utter chaos. Wei Ke arrived 10 seconds later, rushing into the cave hurriedly. But Lu Yi and the others were long gone. All he could find were broken rocks strewn everywhere. Where the hell are they? Wei Ke gasped to himself, his face fraught with consternation. He was positively certain that Lu Yi and his companions had landed here just now. He had seen them entering this cave when he was still in the air before a thunderous explosion ensued. Yet when he came in here, all of them had vanished. Finding that unbelievable, he searched the place, going even to the deepest, most recesses of the cave system, and ultimately finding a dead end. Still, he could not find the slightest hints of his quarry's whereabouts. 1 minute ago they were all here, and yet they were all gone. Wei Ke hastily left the cave. He peered around for a few seconds before he determined a bearing and soared into the air in that direction, still unable to come to terms with Lu Yi and his companions' disappearing act. They must be somewhere nearby, he thought, and I must find them. Meanwhile, inside another subterranean cavern more than 100 meters underground 200 miles away, the unseen lines of the teleportation ward traced on the ground came alive with a sudden dazzling and intense incandescence. The air around the ward warped and 3 figures materialized almost miraculously. The moment their feet hit solid ground, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan staggered so unsteadily that they nearly fell, their faces sickly pale and aghast. None of them were hurt during the encounter with Wei Quebec. But it was the terrifying sensation of having nothing under their feet during the magical conveyance here that had them both feeling as if they had been thrust down a bottomless abyss. Felt so real and vivid. But more importantly, neither of them knew if they should be channeling their spiritual power with fear that it might disrupt the conveyance process, despite how being unready greatly unsettled them. Especially when what seemed like a split-second process felt more like an eternal and precipitous descent into a bottomless pit to them. Now they understood why Amber clutched onto Lu Yi as soon as the conveyance process began. It must have learned from the many times it traveled all around the Colosseum with Lu Yi. But before they could fully recover from the ordeal of the process, the bluish glow from the back of their hands illuminated the jagged and rough surface of the cave floor. Still within the circle of the teleportation ward, all three of them tensed warily. That their battlefield imprints were reacting in unison would mean that they were not alone and whoever was nearby. He or she must be a cultivator of the Thousand Demon Ridge. With their innate and remarkable senses, they noticed there really was someone nearby. Just a little more than 50 meters away, He Bing was sitting alone on the ground, recuperating quietly. He came to this cave just 4 hours ago, and after making sure that this place was empty, he had decided to stop and rest there. He had no companion, and as with all other Seventh Orders, he was at an impasse. Being alone basically precluded him from being able to compete for a good position on the Carnage roster. Getting on the roster was doable, but he didn't expect that he would be high enough to win anything worth the trouble. Therefore, he chose to focus his efforts on the Token of Providence events, as well as all other endowments that appeared all over the Colosseum. At times, he would be lucky enough to stumble upon weaker Grand Sky Coalition cultivators whom he could kill and get a good haul from the loot. At times, when fate wished to test him, he would be faced with opponents he could barely defeat. Nevertheless, as Seventh Orders, escaping unscathed from enemy 8th and 9th Orders remained possible. He Bing would not have chosen to operate alone if he was not confident enough in his abilities and strength. He was just having a moment of solitude in the peacefulness of the cave, when the darkness within was broken. It was a magical ward, and before he could comprehend what was going on, 3 figures appeared within it. He Bing's eyes went wide. What the hell? How did these 3 people just come out of nowhere like that? But he quickly collected himself and his brow cocked with interest. He had understood something. These 3 people must have used some sort of teleportation ward. That must be what the glowing lines that appeared were. But a Cloud River Realm cultivator skilled enough to construct something as complex as a teleportation ward. Interesting. He Bing gradually rose to his feet. It was Lu Yi who saw He Bing first, and he cursed quietly to himself. The enemy was alone, and the timing could not have been any worse for them to encounter a lone wolf right here and now. There was no telling what rank the stranger was, but he must be at least a 7th Order. He could still remember the last time he was surprised by the presence of a Thousand Demon Ridge enemy during his escape using a teleportation ward, and he certainly did not expect it to happen again so soon. But as much as he was surprised, it wasn't incomprehensible. If he had found this cave, then anyone could find it too. From his initial posture, the stranger looked like he was just here for a rest, although there was no telling how long he had been here. Lu Yi was lucky last time that his opponent wasn't too powerful, and with Yi Yi's help, he had defeated him and survived. But whether or not he would repeat that feat again today remained to be seen. He could only hope that the enemy was not an 8th, or even a 9th Order, or they would be dead meat. Hence, the same moment He Bing rose to his feet, Lu Yi wildly willed his teleportation ward to activate once more to send them elsewhere. Each and every teleportation ward that he had constructed was linked to at least 2 other wards. The one that they had used to come here was obviously destroyed to prevent Wei Kei from divining their whereabouts, but there should at least be one more that he could use to escape to. But the next second he felt his heart skip a beat. He could not pick up any signs of another teleportation ward connected to this one. What a string of unfortunate events. Not only had they stumbled into an enemy that was likely a 7th Order at least, but the teleportation ward could no longer be used. That he could not sense its link to the rest of its counterparts could only mean that the others had been destroyed. There was no way out. His luck had been so good. But all of a sudden it had taken a plunge. For starters, it was unpredictable what would happen if they were to fight here. Engaging in a battle could result in the entire rock chamber caving in and collapsing on them, regardless of the outcome. All 4 of them could be buried alive here. Lu Yi lifted a hand to stroke Amber. Li Baxian stood in front of Lu Yi, shielding him. This place doesn't seem suitable for a fight, my friend. It's cramped and it's in danger of crashing down. What do you think? He called. Behind his mask, Li Baxian was grimacing grimly at their fate. They had just jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. He did not know what went wrong with the teleportation ward, but he was right. This really wasn't the ideal place to start a fight. Furthermore, he had the same suspicion as Lu Yi. If the enemy was alone, that would mean that he must be a formidable opponent with might that not even the collective strength of all three of them might prevail against. If they could pacify and calm the enemy down, they might be able to walk away from this unscathed. He Bing seized his spear and thrust it down on the ground to intimidate everyone, exuding an aura of power and force. "Do you think you mice are a threat to me?" He grinned. His spiritual power churned. He Bing really was a seventh order. Lu Yi and his companions exhaled with relief. They were eased by the notion that the enemy was a seventh order. At the very least, the situation wasn't as dismal as they dreaded. If He Bing was an eighth or even a ninth order, then a victory might only be possible at the cost of their own lives. Nevertheless, that did not make this an easy battle at all. Lu Yi and his group had jointly defeated a sixth order before, but fighting a seventh order was different. None of them had any confidence at all. More importantly, Wei Kei must still be hunting for them. A ninth order could easily cover the distance of 200 miles. So if a fight were to break out now, the commotion could easily attract Wei Kei's or anyone else's attention if they were nearby, assuming the cave managed to withstand the abuse of a fight here. Impudence. Lu Yi and his companions maintained their silence, but this only served to embolden He Bing. "Sneaky scoundrels," he snorted, "show yourselves. Remove those masks this instant." Chapter 5:16 A sense of exhilaration. Many within the Cloud River battlefield chose to keep their faces masked to hide their identities. As ubiquitous as they were practical, masks in all the varying designs and cost were helpful in concealing identities, allowing many, especially in circumstances where transparency was unwise, to transform into faceless silhouettes that blended and vanished amongst the crowd to preserve their anonymity. Strangely, He Bing held a unique disdain and disgust for such trappings, and with the power he wielded, he was trying to impose his will on Lu Yi and the others. "I'll count to 3, he commanded, his tone ice-cold. "Remove your masks." He would have charged forward without a word if not for the geographical disadvantage the moment he realized that the newcomers were enemies. That the newcomers had arrived in a group was all he needed to know that they must be weaker than he was. He had defeated many such enemies before despite the numerical disadvantage, and few had managed to put up what could be worthy of a fair battle. 1. 2. Li Baxian reached to remove his mask, resignation etched on his concealed face as he sighed helplessly. He was such an indomitable presence in the Spirit Creek battlefield, and there was hardly anyone who did not fear the name Li Baxian of the Devoted Ones. Still, here he was, as weak as any novice could be in this new world. Like lightning flashing across a calm sky, Lu Yi burst forward from behind Li Baxian, his gleaming blade sending an arc of light hurtling toward He Bing. "Impudence!" He Bing boomed, indignant at their defiance. He lifted his spear to retaliate, the weapon effortlessly shattering the incandescent scythe of light. Rage came in waves. Even despite the odds, these puny voles dared to attack him first when he had not. His cold eyes took in the audacious challenger, a mere third order, judging by the glow emanating from him, who was already sprinting at him, and he cracked into a wicked grin. "A third order, eh? Is this fool wishing for his own death?" He mused. He could easily blast the challenger to death with just one blow. But a flutter of spiritual power from behind caused him to pause. Someone was behind him. His focus had been centered on Lu Yi the whole time, and it was too late. Something dark shrouded him, and by the time he regained his senses, he found himself lost in a completely different environment, ensnared in an unfamiliar rocky terrain. He Bing's visage twisted with confusion. He did not know what just happened and what had caused the cave to vanish, replaced by the eerie forest that now surrounded him. Back in the cave he materialized, holding aloft the mystical Nine-Realm scroll with the drawings of a rocky sprawl etched upon its surface. Right in the center of the sprawl was the image of a solitary figure, unmistakably He Bing, still spinning around, completely confused. being stuck here because of the failure of escaping using the teleportation ward in such a dangerous predicament with a formidable Seventh Order to contend with was not Lu Ye's nor his companion's idea of fun. Lu Yi knew fully well how dire and desperate the situation was, and so did the others. They understood that He Bing's delay in initiating combat was due to his inability to gauge their cultivation ranks at first. Had he perceived their relative weakness, he would have struck without a second thought. Thus they planned their course of action. When Li Baxian stepped forward to shield Lu Yi, the latter made a subtle gesture by tapping on the miniaturized Amber's head. A silent message communicated through years of shared trials and understanding with Yi. That was when Yi slipped away, reappearing behind He Bing like a wisp of smoke. With Lu Yi keeping He Bing distracted, Yi sprung her trap, unfurling the Nine Realms scroll. A spirit treasure more potent than any spirit artifact weapon. Its might increased as Yi's cultivation grew. That, plus the element of surprise, was what helped to ensnare the mighty He Bing within it. In spite of everything, this was an outcome they would have preferred. Fighting in the cavern risked catastrophic collapse or even attracting the attention of other formidable entities like Wei Kei of the Thousand Demon Ridge. The Nine Realms scroll could contain whatever damage sustained inside, limiting the risks as long as Yi could endure it. As soon as He Bing was ensnared, Lu Yi bolted forward towards, followed closely by Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They did not know what just happened, but their confused expressions soon morphed into determination as they decided to follow Lu Yi. He flapped the scroll and all three of them vanished, their forms now joining He Bing within the image of the rocky sprawl, appearing on the parchment surface. Deep in the spread of rocky terrain inside the Nine Realms scroll pocket dimension, He Bing watched as his opponents appeared one after another. He finally grasped his predicament, realizing where he was at last, the pocket dimension of a ward scroll. He had lived long enough, amassing sufficient skills, awareness, and experiences, to learn about that from the sudden changes in the surroundings and how his opponents had reappeared. His eyes narrowed, acknowledging the fact that he faced not 3, but 4 adversaries. The fourth had been hiding in the shadows and was most likely the one wielding the ward scroll now. While fear gripped his heart, a thrill of anticipation also coursed through him. A ward scroll was a priceless artifact. In spite of their low rank in cultivation, He Bing was surprised that his opponents were in possession of such an extraordinary item. If he could defeat them, the ward scroll could be his. No longer hesitating, He Bing made his move, charging toward Lu Yi first and foremost. The decision was an easy one. Lu Yi had already exposed himself as a third order, for ranks well below He Bing. Brimming with confidence, He Bing believed that he could eliminate Lu Yi with a single strike. With great speed, he covered more than 10 meters in just 2 strides, reaching Lu Yi in the blink of an eye as he thrust his spear forward. Such a straightforward attack, but it gave Lu Yi an immense and panicky sense of crisis. His entire self tensed as Inviolable screamed out of its sheath with a ringing cry. Spiritual power surged down the length of its blade as Lu Yi slashed the weapon in an upward slash to meet the incoming spear tip. Lu Ye's eyes constricted the moment steel clashed. The blow came heavy and forceful, and for a split second, Lu Yi felt like his weapon had hit a solid rock boulder instead. The spear tip was barely deflected at all from its lethal trajectory. A precipice of life or death in one solitary exchange. Such was the force of an attack delivered by a Seventh Order, and it was clear that He Bing had yet to unleash his full might. The Fourth and the Seventh Orders each represented 2 critical thresholds in the Spirit Creek realm. Cultivators who made it past these 2 orders would find themselves experiencing a significant escalation of one's strength, and the same principle applied within the Cloud River realm as well. Therefore, only cultivators beyond the Seventh Order realm possessed both the ability and audacity to venture into the Colosseum alone. Nevertheless, there were exceptions to this rule. There were also Sixth Orders who fancied their chances solo, such as the one Lu Yi and Yi had defeated together earlier. The luminescent shield of runes of glyph protection materialized in front of Lu Yi as he contorted himself backward as much as possible. The spear grazed past him, annihilating the glowing shield in its wake, while leaving a searing trail of pain across Lu Ye's neck as he nearly tumbled from the blow. And before Lu Yi could regain his footing, He Bing's spear, having failed to find its initial mark, descended like a crushing rod about to bash his skull. With a resounding thud, Lu Yi found himself slammed onto the ground with numbing waves of pain spreading from his shoulder blade down to his lower abdomen. A flicker of surprise sparked in He Bing's eyes. Evidently, he was not expecting a third order to survive that blow. Yet that was the extent of his surprise. With Lu Yi smashed into the ground, his spiritual power in complete disarray, and his movements momentarily paralyzed, he was a sitting duck. He Bing's spear was wheeling back for another powerful thrust that would have skewered Lu Yi like a boar when a sonorous whistle filled the air. Several menacing waves of death laced with murderous choler and aggression bore down upon him from behind. Sword Cultivator. He Bing swiftly discerned the nature of the assailant bearing down on him, acknowledging that while his three opponents were not on par with him in terms of cultivation, he knew better than to discount the deadliness that sword cultivators were so famous for. In a hurried response, He Bing whirled around to face his attackers, his gaze meeting a sky filled with luminescent flying shafts. He immediately rattled his long spear, setting off a symphony of blooming silhouettes shaped like the tip of his spear. The resounding clangor of metal on metal echoed through the surroundings as sparks erupted and danced. Every incoming shaft was deftly deflected, their onslaught momentarily held at bay. Amid the hail of radiantly glowing shafts, streaking spells spiraled around seamlessly, integrating with the flying bolts of light in a relentless and ceaseless assault, an unending tempest of deadly artistry. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan had spent their formative years together, their bond forged from shared experiences of growth and cultivation. For the sake of Li Baxian, who had become her childhood sweetheart, Feng Yuechan was willing to linger in the Spirit Creek realm for over a decade, suffering a stagnation in her progress when she could have achieved more. This shared history manifested in a formidable partnership, flawless and impeccably coordinated. The gravity of the situation was not lost on He Bing as he noticed an unsettling detail. The sword and the spell cultivators were both a step above the combat cultivator in terms of rank, each evidently fourth orders. Yet, the depth of their mastery and skill seemed to exceed He Bing's own level. All three of them must be acolytes of renowned sects or orders, and their prowess clearly a hallmark of their status as elites. Strangely, this revelation, while daunting, stirred a sense of exhilaration within He Bing. His roots lay in a modest Tier 4 sect. Even though he had advanced into the Cloud River realm with all 360 spiritual points unlocked, He Bing was aware of his inferior standing in comparison to the true prodigies, those whose name had once been on the Spirit Creek battlefield's roll of supremacy while his own name had been notably absent. Yet right here, right now, he found himself securely in possession of the initiative in this fight against three formidable adversaries. If this were a fight where all of them were equals in cultivation ranks, he would not have stood a chance at all, not even in single combat against any of these adversaries. So what if they came from prestigious backgrounds? So what if they possessed superior talents? Nothing could trump the sheer difference in their cultivation rank. Nevertheless, he could not shake off an uncanny familiarity that never stopped nagging at him. Sometime before, or somewhere unknown, he felt as if he had seen the sword cultivator and the spell cultivator. While Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan held He Bing in a tight deadlock, Lu Yi quickly scrambled to his feet and extricated himself from the immediate vicinity. Wiping a hand across his scarlet-drenched neck, he felt the slickness and heat of his own blood on his hand. He recognized the close shave he had just had, the dangerous proximity of He Bing's lethal spear and the monumental risk of facing a seventh order all by himself as a third order. He would have been killed if he were any slower. Go! He Bing unleashed a guttural bark. Several streaks of light, the telltale glow that flying weapons emitted, burst to life abruptly. They sliced through the chaotic whirlwind of flying swords and spells and hurtled toward Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Neither Li Baxian nor Feng Yuechan had the audacity to stand in direct opposition to such an onslaught. Feng Yuechan produced her umbrella-like spell artifact. Unfurling its protective expanse before them, they braced themselves for the incoming cascading impact. When the flying weapons hit, each of their powerful strikes against the luminescent shield of the umbrella-like spell artifact pummeled Feng Yuechan with one piecemeal step, eliciting protesting flares of brilliance from the umbrella. Surviving the barrage, they looked up to find He Bing successfully penetrating beyond the shafts of light, charging headlong into them. Li Baxian brandished his sword. The weapon trembled in his grip as if recalling the legion of glowing shafts that instantly regrouped around him, coalescing into a dragon-like monstrosity to counter He Bing. Both figures threw themselves into each other, but as soon as they met, the dragon burst into countless sparkling white cinders while Li Baxian careened away, crashing to the ground like a rag doll. Chapter 517 And Who Might You Be? He Bing persisted unwaveringly in the pursuit of his quarry with the doggedness of a shark on the scent of blood, his spear thrusting towards the descending figure of Li Baxian with the ferocity and deadliness of a pit viper, poised to kill and maim. Feng Yuechan's being brimmed with surging spiritual power. A dense mist manifested around her instantly, its appearance precipitously plummeting the ambient temperature. Unaware of the impending danger, He Bing recklessly charged headlong into the frigid atmosphere. The cold air congealed into ice, its crystalline tendrils spreading outward with the intent to encase He Bing in an icy prison. Had they been of equal cultivation levels, breaking free from this spell would have proven nigh impossible. Yet, He Bing's cultivation outstripped Feng Yuechan by at least 3 ranks. Sensing the looming threat, he shook his body, and with waves of surging spiritual power from him, the encasing ice crystals shattered into fragments. His gaze panned to the disheveled Feng Yuechan not far away. At his mental direction, his flying weapon screamed straight for her like a flock of vultures and swooped down with the force of a battering ram, slamming furiously into her umbrella-like spell artifact. The impact sent Feng Yuechan hurtling backward before crashing to the ground ignominiously. "Enjoy playing the savior, huh?" He Bing snarled, grinding his teeth as he darted forth, homing in on Feng Yuechan with a murderous collar. Enveloped in the dazzling illumination of his glowing shafts, Li Baxian bolted forward to intercept. Simultaneously, Lu Yi was launching an assault of his own on He Bing from behind with inviolable blazing crimson red, along the length of its steel in what was a concerted pincer attack on the enemy. However, despite their seamless coordination, the colossal disparity between their cultivation ranks and He Bing's remained insurmountable. In no more than 3 exchanges of blows, both Lu Yi and Li Baxian were sent hurtling through the air with blood spurting forth from their wounds. Feng Yuechan's spell once again surged forth, preventing He Bing from delivering more damage to them. Back inside the underground cavern, Yi clutched the 9-realm scroll in her hands firmly, channeling her spiritual power into it with unwavering desperation, her anxious gaze fixated upon the dynamic interplay of the figures incessantly weaving back and forth amid the furious clash within the confines of the scroll's pocket dimension. Anxiety mounting to the point of panic, she could only sit on her own hands as she witnessed the intensity of the battle unfolding before her. Her current cultivation rank in the Cloud River realm was the highest she had ever accomplished. In theory, by being in control of the 9-realm scroll, she should have been able to provide some form of assistance to Lu Yi and the others. Nevertheless, the ferocity of the ongoing battle now being waged in the scroll's pocket dimension left her feeling powerless. The sheer force of the clash between 4 Cloud River realm cultivators set the scroll into violent tremors, compelling her to exert every ounce of her strength to maintain its operation. Any faltering in the supply of her spiritual power to keep the 9-realm scroll operating and He Bing would escape. To that end, she did not dare to act rashly, and that left her only with the option of maintaining her control of the 9-realm scroll, while praying that her companions would triumph. Back inside the messy sprawl of rock columns and debris that was the scroll's pocket dimension, Lu Yi and Li Baxian were blitzing at He Bing again and again. Yet each time they were met with such formidable resistance from the 7th-order enemy that they were collecting more wounds than doling out them. Feng Yuechan was faring somewhat better, although she was not going easy just yet. Unleashing spells with hardly any signs of respite, she was fully aware that any sign of a letdown would spell the demise of Lu Yi and Li Baxian. Whether Lu Yi, Li Baxian, or even Feng Yuechan, none of them had ever experienced perils as deadly as this. Teetering on the edge of a precipice of death, all 3 of them were aware that one little mistake could lead to irreversible disaster. In the meantime, He Bing's earlier contemptuous expression slowly receded from his face. Whatever superiority he still wielded, the battle was hardly going the way he expected. What he initially anticipated as a one-sided slaughter since he ascertained the cultivation ranks of his adversaries had turned out to be a surprising performance of impeccable resistance. Looking at the overall situation, even if these three teamed up, they were no match for him. Although he was alone, he still had the upper hand due to his strong cultivation. However, in reality, he had difficulty killing any of these three. Whenever he thought that he was about to put down one of them for good, the other two would dive in with reckless abandon to thwart him. This was especially true of the sword cultivator, whose flying shafts of light had been a constant nuisance if not a threat to him. Several times he had toyed with the notion of going the extra mile of killing the sword cultivator and risking being heavily injured. But his reservations got the better of him, and he could only go on allowing this debacle to go on. After all, being injured in the Colosseum would mean that he would have to sit out the rest of the duration to recuperate and heal. At any rate, the situation was increasingly favorable for him. Both the sword and the combat cultivators were getting weaker and slower from their worsening injuries. It would not be long before one of them crumbled to the ground for good, and he would have no trouble dealing with the remaining two. If someone had told him before today that a few third and fourth orders would put up such a good fight against him, he would have casually dismissed the notion with nothing but a disdainful scoff. Yet, right here, right now, the truth was right before his very eyes, proving him wrong. Unbelievable. All three adversaries must be of notable repute, particularly the sword and spell cultivator. The more he clashed with them, the more an uncanny sense of familiarity washed over him. Another intense exchange of blows saw Li Baxuan and Lu Yi successively repulsed one after another. Even before he landed, the mask of a boy's face that Li Baxuan wore cracked and shattered, revealing a gash on his forehead where blood began dribbling out. Had he not swiftly retreated, the injury would have been more than just a mere cut above his brows. His very skull might have been impaled by the tip of He Bing's spear. Plus, Lu Ye's saber had arced around just in time to parry the blow, and that allowed the opening for Li Baxuan to evade. The pieces of the broken mask fell to the ground, exposing Li Baxuan's stony countenance. He could see no glimmer of victory in sight, given the circumstances, but that did not mean that he was going to give up just yet. With a sideswipe of his spear that blasted aside another one of Feng Yuechan's death bolts, He Bing cast his gaze upon Li Baxuan's face. He was startled for 1 second before he exclaimed, visibly shocked and surprised, "You are Li Baxuan." That was when he realized that the sense of familiarity that has been bugging him was not misplaced. Li Baxuan of all people. As a former Spirit Creek realm cultivator who once roamed the Spirit Creek battlefield, there was no way he wouldn't know the renown of Li Baxuan, the Heavenate monstrosity who once dominated the upper echelons of the battlefield's role of supremacy, that even those whose names were on the roll regarded him with terror. Even He Bing himself once watched Li Baxuan from afar with admiration and envy. He was no stranger to the rumors about how Li Baxuan's damage to his spiritual points was what prevented his ascension to becoming a Heaven 9 cultivator, but he did not know that Li Baxuan had finally stepped into the Cloud River battlefield. That would explain why he had been fighting against an adversary of such profound skill and fundamentals. It was Li Baxuan. That must mean that you're Feng Yuechan? He Bing turned his gaze to the side. Deducing the identity of Feng Yuechan, having confirmed Li Baxuan's profile, posed no difficulty. Their inseparability was well known to all, along with the fact that she was a spell cultivator. He Bing directed his attention to Lu Yi at last. "And who might you be?" he asked. The pieces were beginning to fit into place. The renowned Li Baxuan and Feng Yuechan, who after more than a decade of remaining in the Spirit Creek realm, would possess such impeccable skill and proficiency displayed in the skirmish earlier. But what about this stranger in the mask of a long-fanged demon? Despite being one rank lower than Li Baxuan and Feng Yuechan in cultivation, his strength and skill were on par with theirs. But Lu Yi had hardly the inclination to respond to the question. Seizing the moment, he used the moment to gather his strength. He was drenched with blood from head to toe. While the wounds that scattered all over him were nowhere near grave yet, the sheer number of the wounds was enough to have crippled anyone else. Even the back of his hand that now gripped the hilt of his weapon was torn, with fresh blood flowing down his hand and onto the steel of his saber. No matter. An unperturbed He Bing responded when he received no answer. Who would have thought that the renowned Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan would meet their demise at my hands? He grinned broadly. How ironic is fate. Certain of his victory, he being advanced. He vanished in 1 second only to reappear just in front of Li Baxian in the next. Exuding an air of certainty regarding their defeat, he advanced and in an instant materialized before Li Baxian. His spear shot up with the speed and intensity of a lashing serpent, aiming straight for Li Baxian's head. The sword cultivator posed the greatest threat to him, and thus had to be eliminated first. At the same time, Lu Yi and Feng Yuechan reacted swiftly. The former pounced upon him from behind, while the latter fired another spell. The legion of flying shafts surged after He Bing in a terrible deluge, yet even with their sheer number and might, He Bing's spear prevailed. With each swing of the long polearm, he swept aside the currents of flying shafts pouring at him before driving it up into Li Baxian's face. Li Baxian had not even the slightest intention to flinch. He held his sword straight, its tip aimed at his foe. Next, he vanished, swallowed by a sudden burst of radiance that turned into a shaft of light of its own that shot forward to charge at the enemy. The atmosphere instantly turned palpably thick with the radiation from both their blows. Li Baxian's fearless charge and He Bing's formidable thrust, as both figures brushed past each other in a split-second exchange of attacks. Li Baxian screeched to a halt more than a dozen meters away. He crumbled to one knee, his hand clutching his abdomen. Crimson blood oozed through his fingers. On the other hand, He Bing's cheek was a grotesque mess of mushy flesh and blood. The pain ignited furious anger within him. How could this have happened? A mere fourth order who could hurt him? He Bing dismissed Feng Yuechan's incoming death bolt with a smack of his spear, shattering it into oblivion. Next, he pivoted around and bolted after Li Baxian, his icy resolve to kill now set in stone. But one stride was all he managed before Lu Yi appeared from his flank with inviolable bearing down on him, its sharp edge glinting dangerously. Get out of my sight! He Bing snarled angrily, his spear rising to swat Lu Yi aside. Their steels clashed and it was then He Bing realized that something had changed. The third-order stranger had grown swifter and stronger all of a sudden. Several resounding clashes ensued and Lu Yi was finally flung backward. He landed beside Li Baxian, his right arm throbbing incessantly despite inviolable still in his grip. But He Bing appeared perplexed. He was sure that a single strike would suffice to repel Lu Yi. At least that was the case before. Yet, just now Lu Yi had managed to parry several thrusts of his spear. His strength seemed to have undergone a tremendous, inexplicable, and even undeniably abnormal surge. He glanced at Lu Yi, beholding a strange sight. There was Lu Yi, swathed in a crimson layer of spiritual power roiling with blood-made energy. The energies churned like rolling flames. Amber, who had been perched on his shoulder all along, was supplying more blood-made energy to Lu Yi, shrouding him in a dusky red luminescence. What on earth is that? Some unknown technique. What He Bing failed to see, without the help of any spiritual vision-based abilities, was a blood-red glyph hovering right over Lu Yi's chest, working its magic. Lu Yi seldom used glyph, blood rage. It had been a while since he had encountered any enemies who had given him cause for such a bitter struggle. Most, if not all of them, were either so feeble that they barely withstood more than one attack from him, or it was he who was defeated that way. Blood rage required time to gradually build up its effect for any results to show, and that made it difficult and inconvenient to harness. But this battle had been a unique experience for him. A battle against such a powerful enemy would have been decided in a second if it were single combat. Yet, with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan present to fight alongside him, this had turned into a chance for blood rage to prove its worth. Right when the battle first began, Lu Yi had constructed the glyph over his own chest. The wounds that he collected and the blood that he had lost, all of them had helped blood rage to channel to its fullest, and that had engendered a profound transformation in his strength and power. He might still be a third order, but the power he now unleashed could match what fourth orders could. Given enough time, blood rage could give him an augmentation in his power that could equal fifth orders or even higher. Once he could go toe-to-toe against He Bing, he could change the outcome, rather than being just a desperate attempt to survive. Whatever reservations He Bing harbored, he dismissed them all. He had come too far to allow any second thoughts to come in the way of winning this battle. No one would falter at this juncture. It was either to win or to die. Li Baxin rose to his feet, getting up beside Lu Yi. With his spiritual power, he staunched the wounds that beset him. His wounds pulsated with morbid vigor, writhing and convulsing as if in protest to the healing while his sinews slithered to repair themselves. The airborne shafts now scattered everywhere swiftly converge under his command. Pointing his long sword at the enemy with steely resolve, he croaked hoarsely, "Advance!" In unison, the two figures darted valiantly forward, attacking He Bing from both flanks. Feng Yuqian began letting loose one flurry of spells after another, not seeking to kill or to maim, but to disperse the focus of the enemy and relieve as much strain from Li Baxin and Lu Yi as possible. Chapter 518 The Secret Technique of the Myriad Beast Domain. The embers of battle rekindled once again. Only this time, He Bing was no longer as confident and calm as he was before, for he was now certain of Lu Ye's growth in his prowess. It was as Lu Yi expected. The earlier onset of the battle was a struggle for their survival. But now, they possessed the means to turn the tables, even if the means were short-lived. The elevation in Lu Ye's power did not come without its cost. It was fueled by his own vitality that blood rage tapped into. Wielding the strength and power of a fourth order, Lu Yi could deliver strokes faster and stronger than before. All of that would naturally inflict a certain degree of strain on his body. In this state, he could only keep on fighting for less than half his normal duration. Once the time limit expired, he would be depleted. But if they lacked the means to put up an equal fight, then all other considerations would be futile. The heightened strength and speed Lu Yi was showing did not go unnoticed by He Bing. Li Baxin was equally aware of it. He did not know what had Lu Yi done, but it undeniably helped to tilt the scales in their favor, and that called for an immediate alteration in their previous strategy. The battle against He Bing started with Lu Yi in a supporting role. But now Lu Yi would be leading the attack with Li Baxin rotating into the supporting role to rectify any gaps in their defense. Additionally, with Feng Yuqian to help divert He Bing's attention, the battle has effectively transformed into anyone's game. This time they would no longer be easily repelled by He Bing like before. With Lu Yi at the forefront, they now had the capability to exchange blows with the Seventh Order on almost equal grounds. Especially, since the scales were tipping more in their favor with each passing second. In the meantime, He Bing was growing increasingly despondent. His enemies possessed cultivation ranks far lower than his own. He had every confidence of winning them all in single combat. It would take only 10 seconds. In fact, he would have done that if it were just 2 enemies. But there were 3. The 2 would ceaselessly rain hails of attacks on him in close range while the third would pepper him relentlessly with spells while maintaining her distance. All that was putting him in quite a fix. What should have been a one-sided beatdown presided by him was thwarted by their seamless collaboration. Instead of killing at least one of them, they were now slowly gaining up on him. Especially the third-order combat cultivator. He Bing did not know what really happened, but somehow the third order was getting stronger the longer the fight went on. At present, they possessed the capability to threaten him. Before too long, they might even be able to truly defeat him. He Bing seethed with frustration. Had he known about this, he would have rather risked severe injury just so that he could kill or incapacitate one of the 3 at least. That would have spared him the fate of being ensnared in this stalemate that could very well end up in his defeat. But the opportunity no longer presented itself. The gambit of risking injury just to kill one of them would never work now. Doing so would be tantamount to suicide at this juncture, He Bing believed. Hence it was one option that he would never undertake. Whatever the combat cultivator had done to generate such a surge in his power had to come with a price. Therefore, He Bing was confident that all he needed to do was wait for the moment when the combat cultivator could no longer endure the price that sustained the enhancement in his power. That would mark the moment of his final victory. With that in mind, He Bing brandished his spear, forsaking offense for defense. The fact that he, a formidable Seventh Order, was compelled to make such a choice proved an immense humiliation. Nevertheless, a beggar could not be a chooser. So long as he emerged victorious, how he clinched that victory would hold little significance. At any rate, he was fighting against the two of the most famous cultivators ever to walk the Spirit Creek battlefield. The renowned Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. By he being only defending and not attacking, Lu Yi and Li Baxian would find their attacks useless. Neither of them would be able to penetrate his defenses, let alone deal any significant damage. The streaking radiance of spells being fired flickered incessantly in the dimly lit rocky sprawl, plus the occasional scythe-like energy projectiles and glowing shafts that crisscrossed the area. He Bing steadfastly stood his ground, swinging his polearm to parry and deflect whatever attacks that came his way. His presence looming like an eternal and indomitable iceberg that was impervious to any external threats. With glyph, blood rage continually operating, Lu Ye's power was nearing the levels of the Fifth Order. He had been observing He Bing's countenance. The Seventh Order was not looking flustered at all when the fight began. But now He Bing was sporting a visibly more serious expression. He was investing his full power into defending every blow they were dishing his way. He could now more or less pose a credible threat to He Bing. In fact, if Lu Yi were a real Fifth Order, he might have been able to go toe-to-toe against He Bing and perhaps even win. But what he possessed right now was just the artificial power of the Fifth Order, which was inferior if compared to the might of a real Fifth Order. In fact, Lu Yi could feel that he had reached the limits of what enhancements blood rage could afford him, which was understandably reasonable. There was no way the glyph had no limitation, especially after it had elevated his power by 2 ranks. That alone discounted any doubt as to glyph, blood rage's potency, despite its weakness that it needed time to channel before its enhancement could be significant enough to make any difference. More than 15 minutes had elapsed since they entered the pocket dimension of the 9-realm scroll, and that was what helped blood rage to reach its full potential. The collective might of all 3 of them could now resist He Bing, but they would still need more than that. He Bing was grateful for his own patience. Rather than succumbing to his panic, his decision to focus on defense had paid off, and he still had a lot of strength left. He was not surprised that Lu Yi had methods that could enhance his power. But what amazed him was the extent of growth in his power because of this unknown method. Yet, He Bing knew very well that the enhancement would not be without its cost. The higher the growth, the greater the cost must be. In fact, he could see that the enhancement had reached its limit. Lu Yi appeared to be at his peak at the moment, and all he had to do was just hold on. The clangor of steel reverberated through the air as Lu Yi and Li Baxian's figures intertwined like a pair of wraiths, yet nothing they did could penetrate He Bing's defenses. A sense of unease crept over Li Baxian. The current status quo might appear favorable, but he knew that perils still lurked unseen. More than 7/10 of the offense was now being shouldered by Lu Yi. Once glyph, blood rage had reached its time limit, their defeat would become inevitable. If only they could conclude this battle quickly. But with He Bing now choosing to defend rather than attack, he clearly intended to prolong the fight. But if they failed to end this battle before Lu Ye's power plummeted, then this would become their final resting place. Li Baxian still had one little trick hidden up his sleeve, but the final ace could only be used if he was absolutely sure that employing it would seal their victory, or else, using it would only cause more harm than good. Amidst the ferocious combat, Li Baxian cast a glance toward Lu Yi and found himself taken aback. Lu Yi looked completely unfazed, his countenance utterly devoid of any hint of impatience or panic. Every strike he made emanated focused effort, and Li Baxian felt inspired with the same calmness and composure. Indeed, if his junior brother could keep his cool despite the dire situation, why should he panic? As a more experienced cultivator than Lu Yi, he should be stronger than his junior. So what if they were to die here? Such was the life of being a cultivator. The revelation helped to restore a sense of peace and clarity in Li Baxian. At the same time, Li Baxian wondered if his senses were deceiving him. He was picking up a tinge of bestial power mingling within Lu Ye's aura. Even his movements betrayed a never-before-seen quality comparable to an untamed ferocious beast. Meanwhile, Lu Ye's mind was beginning to experience a change. This newfound source of power manifested as a pair of ethereal tiger ears on his head and a tiger's tail at his back. The new appendage swayed gently, lifelike. The mightiest secret technique of the myriad beast domain. Beast form. Chapter 519 He Bing Must Die. Beastmasters were a crop of enigmatic and yet interesting cultivators. Zhou's very own breed of beastmasters had strayed from the true essence of beast mastery by fixating on the acquisition and the taming and nurturing of spirit beasts to be used for battle while neglecting the cultivation of their own strength. As a result, the beastmasters of Zhou lacked personal prowess. In their pursuit of numbers, many of them came to possess multiple spirit beasts, with some even boasting dozens or 20 of such creatures in their command. In the early stages of their cultivation, the beastmasters had succeeded in overpowering their opponents through sheer numerical advantage. This led them astray, gradually deviating from the right path. They became so engrossed in nurturing and controlling their spirit beasts that they neglected their own personal development. To that end, the beastmasters of Zhou were not renowned for their superiority. In fact, they paled in comparison even to golem masters, who, despite their obsession with external elements, had not strayed from the purpose of enhancing their own abilities. Contrarily, the beastmasters of the myriad beast domain took an entirely different approach. They controlled only one spirit beast, one that was life-bound to them through magical seals known as beast packs. If the methods of the beastmasters of Zhou focused on the beasts, then the ones of the myriad beast domain prioritized their own cultivation, which should have been the actual and proper path for all beastmasters. And the pinnacle of beast mastery lay in the technique known as beast form. Back when Lu Yi was still in the myriad beast domain, deep within the underground insectoid nest of the black tortoise sect territory, he encountered a beast-formed Niumeng who presented himself with the appearance of a formidable beast. That, plus the insectoid nucleus, allowed Niumeng to embody an abundance of vitality. Single-handedly, he nearly annihilated an entire squad of cultivators consisting of Lu Yi and others. It was only with the instruction of the Grand Elder to break Niumeng's beast pack to release him from his beast form that they stood a chance of defeating him. At the Ninth Order, just like Niumeng, Zhou Hai, Pang Dehai, and Xia Qianqian each possessed considerable strength in their own right. Especially Zhou Haiyan, who was known for his prowess with the sword. Yet their collective might, eclipsed by the might of Niumeng's brute strength, did not prevent Zhou Hai from suffering massive abuse by Niumeng, a testament to the tremendous power bestowed by the beast form technique. During their time in the secret realm of the myriad beast domain, Lu Yi had created a beast pact with Amber and had learned the secrets of beast form, although he had not yet found the opportunity to reach the state, until today. Beast form was not something that could be triggered at will. Rather, it required extensive accumulation. However, this battle with He Bing provided the opportunity he had been waiting for. His survival instincts, the resolve to defeat He Bing, and his bond and unity with Amber. The fusion of their blood aura, spiritual power, and Amber's innate mutant aura, all fulfilled Lu Ye's prerequisite conditions to enter beast form state. But Lu Ye's current transformation fell short of reaching Niumeng's level. Unlike Niumeng's change that saw him almost transfigured with real spirit beast features, Lu Ye's body was enveloped in an orange glow, with amber luminescent tiger ears and tail appearing as distinct features. This change left not only He Bing astounded, but also dumbfounded Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. It had only been 20 days since Lu Yi had sold the Beast Pack technique to the Divine Trade Association, and up until now, no Beastmaster in Zhou had ever achieved beast form yet. That was why He Bing, Li Baxian, and Feng Yuechan had never witnessed such a phenomenon before, and no one knew what was happening. But He Bing understood that the situation was spiraling out of his control. Whatever change was happening to Lu Yi, his already formidable aura was scaling up to unprecedented heights. In fact, he exuded an unbridled ferocity, his blood surging through every vein and artery with speed and intensity, and his spiritual power emanated like a blazing furnace, reminiscent of an ancient beast of boundless savageness broken free from its confines. Back in the cave, Yi was clutching the Nine-Realm Scroll firmly in her fingers, diligently maintaining its operation, when Lu Yi entered beast form. Ripples swept across the surface of the scroll like an earthquake, indicating an excessive strain within the spatial confines of the scroll's pocket dimension. It was not the scroll failing, but rather wasn't supplying enough spiritual power to allow the scroll to operate at a capacity where it could sustain the sudden surge in power. He hastened to bolster the amount of spiritual power she was injecting into the scroll, and that finally stopped the trembling. In the meantime, feeling the unnatural winds billowing in the midst of the rock column sprawl in resonance with his burgeoning spiritual power, Lu Yi could feel a surrealistic sensation. A complete change in his perception of the world around him. Everything seemed to have slowed down around him, so much so that it afforded him a clear view of everything, the look of surprise and panic now flickering in He Bing's stare, the beads of blood trickling from Li Baxian's forehead, and the gradual formation of Feng Yuechan's sorcery. There wasn't any change in their speeds. It wasn't their movements that had slowed, but it was his movements that had accelerated, causing that unreal sensation. Without warning, He Bing lunged forward, his spear thrusting straight for Lu Yi with the intensity of a serpent while blasting Li Baxian aside before the latter could do anything. Even so, He Bing's instincts tingled wildly, warning him about some unknown, imminent danger. Lu Ye's growth in this battle had far outstripped his comprehension. What he initially thought was a secure victory since he had been playing safe had not turned out the way he expected. Instead of becoming weaker, Lu Yi had turned stronger. That prompted him to abandon his initial plan to defend and attack instead. Only this time, it was Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan that daunted him not one bit at all. The difference in their power and his was apparent enough. Rather, it was Lu Yi, who started out as the weakest combatant in this skirmish that has now become the actual threat to him. Come on, come on. Hack him, hack him. A voice resounded within the depths of Lu Ye's heart all of a sudden, one reminiscent of a babyish fierce toddler, crying out at him as He Bing's spear tip drew near. Inviolable was halfway through deflecting away the incoming blow when Lu Yi heard the disembodied voice. Startled by the sudden sound, what strength he gathered wavered momentarily, diminishing its potency by a fraction. With a resounding clang, sparks flew and flames splashed in all directions as Lu Ye's figure hurtled backward. He Bing, fueled by his newfound momentum, unleashed a vicious flurry of blows, enveloping Lu Yi within its whirlwind, while at the same time he was secretly relieved to find that Lu Ye's sudden spurt of power did not exceed his anticipation. He had overestimated Lu Yi, or so he believed. Strike after strike, Lu Yi retreated steadily. Inviolable was now an instrument of defense rather than of offense, parrying and sideswiping away desperately every attack He Bing was throwing at him. And with every stroke, the same disembodied, childlike voice squealed deep within his mind, ceaselessly chattering with a fierce and spirited tone like an incessantly annoying commentary. Left, left. Here comes the right side. Oh heavens, that was sloppy. Strike at him, not his spear. What's the point of hitting his weapon anyway? That's pathetic. Stab him in the stomach. In his chest. Gods, do you even know how to fight? Good chance, bite him. Bite him in the neck. Go, go, go. Every time Lu Yi wanted to do anything, the voice would appear. If anything, it was more bothersome than helpful. Lu Yi was still baffled as to the origin of the voice, up until he heard it urging him to bite He Bing in the neck. That was when Lu Yi realized the source. Amber. What? So it really is you. Lu Yi mused deep inside. Astonished, Lu Yi marveled at the fact that he could clearly hear Amber's voice even in his beast form state. It wasn't Amber speaking directly, but a manifestation of their deep spiritual connection. Amber was able to transform into a cat at will, but it could not quite yet transfigure itself into humanoid form. It could not communicate in the human tongue, but it has all along been able to forge spiritual connections, and entering beast form had created a link between it and Lu Yi, allowing them both to communicate directly. For one moment, Lu Yi did not know how to react. After knowing the tiger for so long, he knew nothing about the tiger's behavior. Be quiet, he scowled at the tiger. All right, all right. Amber yelped a reply and stayed silent after that, allowing Lu Yi to stay focused. Meanwhile, He Bing was wearing a smug grin, still under the mistaken impression that Lu Yi must have relied on some incredible technique. He was thinking that whatever transformation Lu Yi might have undergone, it did not translate into the superiority he being feared and anticipated. The combat cultivator clearly was forced to remain on the defensive against his relentless onslaught. 10 blows. That was the limit of how long the young combat cultivator would last. He surmised, if the sword cultivator and the spell cultivator had not been constant nuisances. At least that was what he believed back then, until a sudden upstroke of the combat cultivator's saber carried such an indescribably ferocious burst of spiritual power that it bashed his spear off course. The strength of his opponent's blow shocked him. Seizing the opportunity, Lu Yi pressed forward, not giving his foe any time to react at all. But the latter was stunned. He did not see a human lunging at him with reckless abandon. All he saw was a ferocious predator swooping down on him like a tiger out for blood. Again and again, Lu Yi hurled endless blows at his foe, the ferocity of the assault so overwhelming that he being turned from surprised to terrified. The combat cultivator that he had regarded with indifference if not contempt had transformed into an entirely different person, exuding even greater strength than before. Sword and saber gnashed against spear while blood trickled and splattered, some from Lu Yi plus some from He Bing. Up until now, He Bing had received nothing more than just the scar that Li Baxian had left long ago when the fight was in its initial stage. Aside from that, He Bing had otherwise remained unscathed. But Lu Ye's present strength and power equaled that of a fifth order because of glyph, blood rage, making him quite close to He Bing's level of prowess. That, plus beast form, gave Lu Yi what he needed to surpass He Bing. What Lu Yi received from beast form was more than just an increase in strength, speed, and power. The influence of Amber's animalistic nature rubbed off most prominently, leading him to become unprecedentedly wild and violent. His assaults became attacks driven by an insatiable bloodlust that he became immune to any fear or sense of self-preservation. He Bing was finding himself overwhelmed by Lu Ye's relentless onslaught. Feng Yuechan and Li Baxian's eyes lit up at the astonishing shift in the battle. They quickly threw in what they could: spells, attacks, flying shafts. Anything that they could put into play to support Lu Ye's advance. He Bing's situation grew increasingly dire. Realizing how the tables had been turned against him, He Bing frantically proposed a truce. Shall we call it a draw? There's no need to fight to the death. Never did He Bing expect, since the onset of this battle, that he would be the one proposing peace. What should have been easy pickings turned into him sailing perilously close to the winds. At this critical juncture, he could no longer underestimate Lu Yi and his companions. Lu Yi, however, remained silent. He could see no room for any negotiation, not after all the fighting until now. This gauntlet could only be solved with the death of either side, and He Bing still had the advantage. As soon as beast form and glyph, blood rage ran out, Lu Ye's strength and power would be back to the levels of the third order. If He Bing was still around, they would be left vulnerable. Furthermore, Lu Yi had no intention of revealing the secret of his teleportation ward. With Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan both identified, sparing him would only pose unnecessary risks. At any rate, He Bing's fate was sealed. He had to die. Chapter 520, Slaying He Bing. The dance of blades continued unabated within the clutter of the stone column sprawl. Lu Yi, in his beast form state, unleashed each slash with unprecedented speed and power. He Bing valiantly defended himself with his long spear, but the back of his hand was beginning to split open from the force of Lu Ye's relentless assault. His spiritual power surged tempestuously, yet his situation was growing increasingly precarious. Amidst the chaos, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan provided steadfast support from the sidelines, skillfully distracting He Bing's attention and creating openings for Lu Yi. It was in one such moment that Lu Ye's long saber homed in at He Bing's chest with the intensity of a serpent lunging at its prey. Fear and panic flickered in He Bing's eyes as he desperately leaned back, leaving himself perilously exposed. As much as he wished to deflect the imminent blow, there was no way his movements could make it in time. Lu Ye's current strength had soared to unprecedented heights, rendering He Bing's protective aura too weak to keep him safe against this attack. If struck, it would surely result in a fatal wound that could even mean his death. But just as death seemed inevitable, He-Bing defiantly mustered an unexpected surge of spiritual power. A luminous triangular-shaped energy barrier materialized out of thin air, interposing itself before him and thwarting Inviolable's lethal advance. But the fear of death was real. He-Bing was genuinely terrified. Anyone who saw his face could read that clearly. Surprise and curiosity etched across Lu Ye's countenance as he observed the intricate patterns adorning the impromptu defensive shield. He swiftly recognized what it was. Glyph protection. Was He-Bing a glyph warlock too? No. If He-Bing really was a glyph caster, then he should have used glyphs during the battle. But he didn't, and that only meant one thing. He-Bing did not know glyph casting, but he must have glyphs tattooed on his body. Even for cultivators, tattooed glyphs remained a true rarity. Few possessed the knowledge and skills, plus the resources needed to cast tattooed glyphs. In fact, the physical constitution of most cultivators in the Cloud River realm could only allow them to carry only a single tattooed glyph, as any more would prove unbearable. He-Bing's tattooed glyph must be on his chest, and the burst of spiritual power he just released must be what activated it. That was what saved his life just now. Therefore, Lu Yi was sure that being He-Bing's hidden ace, the glyph must be something he would only use in the most desperate moment. But it was a very surrealistic sensation. Until now, Lu Yi had always been the one using glyph protection, not the other way around. To see firsthand how his attack, a fatal blow that would have ended this skirmish, was thwarted by the same glyph was something new. Yi's ability to move freely underground made her the perfect candidate to stand guard outside and monitor for any unwanted visitors. After all, Lu Yi had always relied on her to scout around and reconnoiter unknown areas for enemies. Meanwhile, the sudden surge in carnage points behind Lu Ye's name had sparked intrigue among many who had been keeping tabs on the developments on the carnage roster. His increments had always been in the hundreds lately, especially for the huge increase when he slew the enemy Sixth Order, and that had piqued the attention of certain quarters who had begun observing him. It did not take long for others to conclude that he must be a low-tiered Cloud River realm cultivator. There were only so many reasons behind his frequently large increments, and the most commonly known way was slaying enemies beyond one's cultivation rank. With a 250-point surge, more people stopped to wonder who was unlucky enough to be his prey. It was worth noting that killing a Ninth Order would only result in a 60-point reward, and yet Lu Ye's reward was more than 4 times that amount. 500 miles away was a disgruntled Wei Kei who was scowling at the carnage roster with palpable frustration. He was aware that Lu Ye's cultivation level stood nowhere higher than the Third Order. A 250-point escalation undoubtedly signified that Lu Yi had slain an enemy Seventh Order. The notion of a Third Order successfully slaying a Seventh Order bordered on the unimaginable. Even with the assistance of Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, it strained credulity. And yet, the evidence lay glaringly before Wei Kei's eyes. But what irritated him wasn't Lu Ye's gain of carnage points. He could care less about Lu Ye's performance in this carnage coliseum, especially since he did not have any intention of climbing the rankings at all. His objective had been Lu Yi all along. And because of that, he was certain that he was heading the wrong way. A battle with an enemy Seventh Order as their adversary would have caused quite a commotion. Yet he had traveled so far and found no signs of them. Where were they? How did they manage to evade his detection? Wei Kei found himself utterly confused. As time slipped away, the rankings on the carnage roster experienced more change, with the gaps between the 2nd and 10th positions becoming smaller and smaller to the extent that a single battle could propel one's position upward by several places. But what intrigued and gladdened those trying to climb the carnage roster was how Lu Ye's carnage points had gone stagnant. Lu Ye's points had remained static for extended periods before, but they had typically increased by several hundred points almost daily afterward. Yet now, Lu Ye's tally had plateaued at 3,990, and had remained there for quite some time without any increments. His former lead of more than 1,000 points had been so commanding that many had felt catching up to him was more impossible than daunting. But his present inactivity ignited renewed determination among the rest of the Carnage Coliseum contestants, compelling them to intensify their hunt for enemies to rake in more carnage points. 3 more days passed by and the second-ranked Tan Sheng finally succeeded in usurping Lu Ye's spot at the top of the Carnage roster. Ecstatic at his achievement, Tan Sheng couldn't help but wonder if Lu Yi had already met his demise. Yet, the persistent presence of Lu Ye's name on the board indicated otherwise. That would mean that Lu Yi must be hurt or recovering from a fierce battle. His guess was right. Lu Yi was indeed busy recuperating. While his injuries weren't overly severe, his body needed respite. A day or 2 of rest would typically be enough for him to recover from the strains of the gritting battle against He Bing, but the compounded drawbacks of using beast form and glyph, blood rage was what enveloped him in a perpetual state of weakness. Recalling a similar weakness he experienced when he once used glyph Fire Phoenix back when he was still in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi lamented how Wuxia was present then. Her tender care had facilitated swift recovery on that occasion. Chapter 521 The Golden Body Token. After 3 days of much-needed rest, Lu Ye's strength was replenished and Li Baxian regained his vigor. With almost 10 days elapsing, there was no telling when this time's Carnage Coliseum would end. In general, Carnage Coliseums typically remained open for a period of 2 to 4 weeks. However, there had been no record of any precise pattern of how long this enclosed dimension stayed open. No one knew exactly how long Carnage Coliseums lasted, and at the conclusion of each Carnage Coliseum, the enigmatic entity known as the Heavens would begin the distribution of spoils based on one's position on the Carnage roster. Once enjoying an impressive lead in the Carnage roster rankings, Lu Ye's position had now slipped to 4th place. It was not entirely unexpected. The rest of the elites that dominated the roster had been relentlessly killing and maiming, just so that they could overtake him during his recuperation period. But Lu Yi was not one to accept defeat easily. If it were before he joined up with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, he would have cared less about his placing on the roster. But after all the hard work to claim the first spot, he was not willing to throw in the towel and watch all that effort go to waste. With his health restored, a fierce determination brewed to reclaim the coveted first place within him. Yet, before he could try clambering his way back to the first spot, he had to attend to some preparations, foremost among them setting up the crucial teleportation wards. The teleportation ward at the cave where they were taking refuge failed to link him to any other wards. If an enemy were to step into this cave, Lu Yi and his companions would be trapped inside. In spite of all that, Lu Yi felt nothing but a mix of exasperation and frustration. He had taken extra care to construct his teleportation wards in obscure corners of the Colosseum grounds, either in the deep recesses of some underground burrows or the depths of subterranean caves. Yet he was acutely aware that if he, with all his resourcefulness, could discover these hidden spots, there was a chance, however slim, that others might stumble upon them as well. Any other cultivator might venture into one of these many caves or burrows and trigger the explosive wards, obliterating everything he had so meticulously crafted. Therefore, the more teleportation wards he could construct the better, so that he would still have others to rely on as insurance. Lu Yi got ready before he slipped out of the cave alone. What should have been a clear blue sky outside was a morbid red sheen blotting out the sunlight. The force field of the Carnage Coliseum phenomena had effectively cast across the entire length and breadth of its grounds a macabre feel of hopelessness. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan did not come with him. They were still in the cave. The perilous task of constructing the wards demanded extreme caution and stealth, making it a mission Lu Yi best undertook alone. More so, since Lu Yi had the means to render himself invisible even if he were to encounter any 8th or 9th orders, while Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan could barely boast of any technique of the kind. Lu Yi traveled for almost 200 miles. His memory led him to a cave he once found before. This was the same spot where he had constructed one of his teleportation wards before. But the inside of the cave was filled with debris, and the place bore the hallmarks of a huge explosion resulting from a surge of spiritual power before. Someone must have been hurt when the explosive ward went off, meaning that the one who had triggered the ward had to be a low-tiered Cloud River Realm cultivator. Most 8th or 9th orders would have been able to walk away from such an explosion unscathed. Lu Yi examined the structural integrity of the cave, concluding finally that it was still strong enough before he cleared the place of all the debris and began reconstructing the wards. Someone might have come here before, but Lu Yi was confident that whoever it was, he or she had found nothing except for a huge explosion that must have been an awfully terrible surprise. To that end, he was sure that the intruder would not come back here. The work took a little more than an hour, then Lu Yi tried testing the teleportation ward. It worked fine, linking not only to the one in the cave Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, but to another ward that was apparently still functioning as well. Back when he first constructed his first set of teleportation wards, there were 12. But after everything that had happened, he did not know how many of the wards were still working. That was because the wards were linked to one another like a chain instead of a widely connected network. That allowed him to only sense the existence of other teleportation wards through immediate pairings and not others. With his work done here, Lu Yi got out of the cave and rendered himself invisible again before he traveled for another 200 miles. With Yi Yi's help, he found another suitable spot where he constructed another teleportation ward. This time this ward was created so that it could link to the one he had just built and the one that was in the cave where Li Baxian was still at. This would allow him to have two options to choose in the event of a quick retreat. Even if one of them were destroyed, he would still have one more to rely on. After Lu Yi knew better than to be careless again. The last thing he wanted was another fight with an opponent as powerful as a 7th order. They might have triumphed against Bing in the end, but not without a huge risk and cost. They had nearly lost their own lives during the course of defeating Bing, and the toll of the battle had taken them 3 days to recover, which was devastating enough for all the work that they had put in to maintain Lu Ye's first position on the Carnage roster. Defeating enemies of the 4th or 5th order was more efficient, way less risky, and definitely more rewarding. Lu Yi constructed 2 more teleportation wards before he finally contacted Li Baxian to make sure that he was still safe. He stood on his freshly built ward and vanished. Reappearing back at the cave where Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan were still sheltered, he regrouped with them and together, they slipped out of the cave. Under the ominous claret sky hanging overhead, Lu Yi and his companions continued their cautious journey for more than 10 miles before Lu Yi stopped to construct some wards to mask his companions' spiritual power signatures. Next, he selected another suitable spot and built a trap ward there as a precautionary measure in case of meeting powerful enemies. When that was done, Lu Yi hid himself and waited for any unsuspecting prey. As time passed with the painstaking pace of a glacier, Lu Yi decided on a brief moment of respite by glancing up at the Carnage roster to check his place. There he saw his position slipping to 7th place, which would only award him 3 gold amulets, a far cry from the rewards of the first prize. In the meantime, enthroned upon the highly coveted first place was Tan Sheng, who by some unknown luck, had built an impressive lead of 300 points, leaving others struggling to catch up. It was Lu Ye's 3-day dormancy that had given the runners-up any semblance of hope to keep catching up in spite of his initial lead of more than 1,000 points. 6 hours breezed by uneventfully until a group of cultivators soared nearby, their cautious demeanor indicating their relatively modest cultivation levels. That they were maintaining a low altitude, barely 30 meters above ground level. Despite using magical conveyance that would have allowed them to fly higher and faster confirmed as much. Clearly, they wanted to be able to hit the ground fast, so that they could hide themselves immediately in the event of encountering strong adversaries. Li Baxian seized the initiative, first to ascertain their allegiances and gauge their power before Feng Yuechan launched any of her potent magical attacks. Lu Yi would be biding his time just like before, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The group turned out to be enemy cultivators, and the concerted efforts of Lu Yi and his companions took no longer than 30 seconds to make short work of them. The trio efficiently cleaned up the site of the battle, leaving no trace of their presence before retreating with their hard-earned spoils and Lu Yi with his ward flags and keystones, ready for another ambush. Despite the seamless progression of their battles, maintaining unwavering vigilance remained imperative. One could never predict when trouble might come visiting in the Carnage Coliseum, an enemy 8th or 9th order for instance. To that end, the trio staunchly adhered to their steadfast principle of not laying ambushes in the same location twice. Upon their return to the subterranean cavern, Lu Yi began undoing the magical seals of the looted storage bags. They divided the spoils amongst themselves before they traveled to another spot using Lu Ye's teleportation ward. After a brief interlude for recuperation, they made ready to resume raiding. True to form, each passing day saw Lu Yi amassing hundreds of carnage points, steadily accumulating until the 13th day of the Colosseum when his total tally reached an impressive 5,440 points. His ranking ascended, settling him comfortably in the 6th position. Yet, despite this commendable pace, it became apparent that regaining the top spot of the Carnage roster had become an unattainable aspiration. The gap that separated him from the current frontrunner Tan Sheng was now a chasm too vast for him to traverse. As an elite 9th order, Tan Sheng could venture everywhere freely without having to worry that he might be attacked. No one in their right mind would do such a thing. So long as he avoided encounters with any elite Grand Sky Coalition 9th orders, Tan Sheng had nothing to fear. In stark contrast, Lu Yi and his comrades had to navigate their every move with the utmost caution, wary of leaving even the faintest trace that might attract the attention of any fearsome enemies. Yet, such predicaments were unavoidable, for their own cultivation levels were just, undeniably and dishearteningly, too low. A profound weakness that had plagued them relentlessly, since the moment they stepped into the Cloud River battlefield. Nevertheless, the rewards for securing the 6th position on the Carnage roster were far from modest. Despite being just one step above the 7th place, the winner of the 6th position would be awarded a bountiful sum of 5 gold amulets. Within the sanctuary of their concealed mountain cave, Lu Yi was sitting right on top of his teleportation ward. He had finished undoing the magical seals on the storage bags and divided them into 3 equal portions. Everyone took their own share. Such a methodical allocation of spoils had become customary for cultivators, making the contents of each individual storage bags contingent upon the capricious whims of fortune. Regrettably, the majority of findings proved unremarkable. A motley collection of inconspicuous trinkets. Some of the bags contained amulets, but their qualities were hardly anything worth celebrating. These amulets were undoubtedly loot foraged from endowment events that occurred all around the Colosseum grounds. What a pity that these amulets were gathered only to fall into the hands of Lu Yi and his companions, inadvertently saving them a huge hassle. One after another, the trio emptied the storage bags of their contents before they sorted the loot and classified everything. From his last storage bag, Lu Yi fished out something odd-looking, an authority token the size of his palm. Engraved upon its surface was an intricate emblem reminiscent of a bell, its depiction accentuated by a few subtle strokes suggestive of luminous emanations at the flank, its appearance oddly whimsical, almost inducing a smile from anyone who gazed upon it. Lu Yi had never seen something like that before and thought that it was just a token bearing an insignia belonging to a sect or an order the slain cultivators belonged to. Nonchalantly poised to cast it aside, his hand froze mid-air when Li Baxian unexpectedly interjected. "Hold it, brother. Let me have a look at that," Li Baxian requested, his eyes trained upon Lu Yi. Curiosity piqued, Lu Yi complied, handing the token to Li Baxian. Taking hold of it, Li Baxian examined the object from every angle, even going so far as to give it a gentle squeeze before passing it, still with an air of uncertainty, to Feng Yuechan. "Take a look at this," he urged her. Feng Yuechan studied the object intently, a flicker of recognition igniting her countenance as she muttered, her expression a mix of astonishment and skepticism. "Could it be?" "What do you think?" Li Baxian inquired. "It certainly seems so. I recall coming across similar markings and dimensions in an ancient tome. What a surprise that this too manifested within the Carnage Colosseum. Someone was lucky enough to have stumbled upon it." "Indeed. I wonder who was lucky to have found this. Not lucky enough, I'd say. Whoever owned this, he or she is dead now." The exchange between the two unexpectedly roused Lu Ye's inquisitiveness. Once their conversation had concluded, Lu Yi finally interjected. "What is this token for, Brother Baxian?" Based on Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's intonation, It clearly seemed that the object held significance far beyond that of a mere identification token, something so enigmatic that he did not know what it could do at all. "Why, this is a treasure indeed," Li Baxian declared, returning the token to Lu Yi. "This, brother, is none other than the infamous golden body token." "Golden body token?" "Yes, brother. You are familiar with golden body talismans, I gather?" The golden body token shares similarities with those talismans in that both provide comprehensive protection. However, while the efficacy of a golden body talisman depends on the quality of the magical talisman itself, this golden body token is a celestial bestowment by the heavens themselves. In other words, once activated, it possesses an unbreakable aura bestowed by the heavens, rendering anyone cloaked by this aura indestructible and unkillable. Furthermore, its duration of effect far exceeds that of a golden body talisman, can persist for several hours at the very least. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.